we're good to go. There's no, it's okay if there's no camera or anything? No video? Okay, so there's no, we don't see anything on our screens? We don't care?
No. Yeah, I do care.
You say you do
I
care?
was saying I don't see anything.
Here we go. All right. Good evening, everyone. This work session of the Osseo School Board is being conducted in person. This work session can be monitored electronically by streaming online from the district website, and an archived recording will also be available on the district website. Consistent with the resolution approved by the school board on August 20th, 2021, a face covering is required to be worn at all Osseo area school buildings, but can be removed when speaking at board business meetings and work sessions. The purpose of the school board work sessions is to build trust and teamwork, to exchange information, and when applicable, to provide direction in order to facilitate efficient and effective decision-making at regular board meetings. Sorry. The outcome of today's work session, our board members will receive the results of the 2021 Family Choice Survey, receive information on 2022 budget planning preliminary levy, continue the process of finalizing the setting of the mission, vision, core values, and strategic directions of the strategic roadmap, and review the ways of working package, which is agenda setting board shared values. To acknowledge attendance this evening, I'll ask that board members please state their names, starting with over here.
Tamara Brady.
Okay. Director Thomas Brooks.
Director Thomas Brooks.
Thanks.
Director Jackie Mosqueda Jones.
Director Tanya Simons.
Director Heather Douglas.
All right, and I, Kelsey Dawson Walton, am present. I will now ask Superintendent McIntyre to facilitate this evening's work session.
All right, thank you, Chair Dawson Walton, and good evening, board members. Tonight we have a full agenda. We're going to be starting off with Peter Leatherman from Morris Leatherman Company, who's here with us tonight to share with us the 2021 Family Choice Survey results. After that, we'll receive information from John Morstead, our Executive Director of Finance and Operations, and Kelly Medusa on our preliminary budget, including the preliminary levy that will be coming up here in the next few weeks. The next two agenda items, and we'll wrap up with Christine Maluski from Teamworks International, reviewing with you the updated strategic roadmap. We're very close on that. After the previous work sessions, we are again close to finishing that work and being able to go up to our stakeholders for feedback for the final board action in November. And then lastly, as mentioned earlier, we'll review our board excellence and governance work, and including agenda setting, board resolutions, and our board shared values. So I just want to comment before we get into the
Superintendent McIntyre, I'm sorry. I think it's like a humming noise in my, oh, okay.
Or it's mine.
Okay.
So I think I'll just kind of keep going and I'll hear the hum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we turn it down, the volume down?
Is that-
We have tech working on it.
Kind of keep plugging away here. Before I turn over to Peter here, I just wanted to once again acknowledge to the board. With the topics on the agenda tonight, I want to say thank you for your continued efforts and work to find ways to function together and work well together. It's been a challenging year and a half with any school board, and just a thank you for your efforts to continue to work through all the things that we've had to keep the challenges that we've been facing. So I admire your commitment. Really, in the end, that's the foundation for service to our scholars and for staff members. So to kind of get us moving towards the parent choice survey, unless I'm told otherwise, keep going. Peter Leatherman's here with us, and just to refresh your memories, we last did this survey in 2016, and it's really to help us understand our parent caregiver school choice decisions. And as you all know, the educational landscape in the Northwest Metro has changed, right? And that's particularly competitive, and the pandemic has really exacerbated some of the typical enrollment changes. So this works to update our oh, now we're in a different spot. I think I'll just give it a give you recess bags.
Don't worry about it.
Give it a second.
Try it now.
Might be better now.
Much better.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep going. So Peter, thanks for being patient. Again, with just. I guess there, I think he's gonna, if I keep talking, he'll dial it in, I think. So, by way of review, in March, you all had a chance to weigh in on input onto the survey. And by end of May, we had that dialed in and began the field testing and the eventual survey going out to our stakeholders. So by having a research firm like Morris Leatherman help us and help us design the questions, help administer the formal survey, I want to stress the confidence we can have in the findings and really helping us look at why do families choose us as a school district? Why do families choose other options? Why do, is there specific interest in different kinds of programming? How do parents learn about our schools? Those are some examples of the things we're going to see in the results here. So there's two different sets of data that Peter will go through with us tonight. There's a lot there. I hope you had a chance to preview that a bit ahead of time because there's a ton of information in there. And Peter and I talked about if there's questions you have following, because I would think you may have some follow-up questions after tonight. He's more than happy to help answer those. So thanks for being patient, Peter. I'll turn it over to you, and maybe you can fill in anything I missed as far as kind of the leading up to this survey.
Wonderful. I assume I'm talking into here, and this is, all right, so hopefully I don't hum. It's a pleasure to be here with you. As Superintendent had mentioned, it is a long presentation. I think I have about 75 charts and about 75 minutes. So I think as we go through, I'm going to be cognizant of the time, probably spend approximately about a minute per slide, maybe a little bit less, take away the highlights. And as the superintendent mentioned, I'm more than happy to answer any specific questions at the end, or I always equate a presentation like this as drinking through a fire hose. And you might think of things 3 days from now or a week from now, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that might come out of it. First off, we're going to look at the outbound. We call this group in the past those that chose to go elsewhere. Now we have 4 different samples within this outbound. The sample size of those being homeschooled were 94 parents. The sample size of those going to private and parochial were 133 parents. The sample size then each of attending another public school district or a charter school is 250. The reason they're different, and because they all have the same margin of error of plus or minus 6.3%, is the universes are different. If you have less than 2,000 in a universe, you can do what's called a small sample correction, where you don't have to talk to as many people in order to achieve the same statistical confidence. So just to make that note, the samples, well, the ends are different. The representation is on all 4 are to within plus or minus 6.3%. You can see the time it took for both surveys. Parents really enjoyed the summer. And there were a lot of appointments and everything set up on both the outbound and your current parent group. So the average interview time was 16 minutes and the non-response rate was 5.5%. As we start this, I've tried to color coordinate this so that the homeschoolers are always going to be blue, the private school parents are always going to be yellow, other public green, and the charter pink. To just show the differences. So if we look at the demographics on the chart, both the private, other public, and charter school parents, about 4 in 10 have have used ECFE or preschool programs in the district. Not so much with the homeschoolers as a statistically significant drop down to 29%. About 20%, if we average it out, have a preschooler or infant in the household. If we look at the age distribution, it's the charter school parents tend to be younger. 18 to 34-year-olds, 42% of the sample. On the flip side, homeschool and those going to other public skew a little bit older. Typical trends we see in outbound surveys. If we look at the demographics on the race and ethnicity, There are very big differences between the groups. Amongst the homeschoolers, you have 43% that indicated they were white, non-Hispanic, 25% Black, Hispanic, Latino, 16% Asian, and then everything else in single digits. Amongst the private school, it's 71% white, choosing to go to a private school. Amongst other public, it's 55% white with 21% Black, Hispanic, and then all the others are in single digits. And then amongst charter school, it's actually a pretty even split between white, non-Hispanic, and the Asian. And obviously with the number of among charter schools in the district, that's impacting the demographics. If we look at this, English is the primary language spoken in the home. English in the homeschool, private and other public, it's about 90% indicating English. But then amongst the charter, you can see that 28% indicated that they spoke Hmong. Continuing with the demographics, the education level, the homeschool, the other public, and the charter are pretty similar makeup of the education of the parent. We see the pattern that we always see amongst private school parents. They're much more likely to be a college graduate or postgraduate, 8 out of 10. The gender, we let that, when we're talking with parents, we don't try to ask for the other parent to try to balance the sample, because that tends to make the parent we're talking to very upset in getting their opinion. So that kind of reflects the number of how the phone breakdown happens. About 60% of the time, a female answers the phone. We men don't answer the phone as frequently as women do. And then there is a difference if we look at charter school. They're much more likely to have students in elementary school, while those going to other public schools, districts are much more likely to have high school students. So before I go in, any general question on methodology or demographics? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so can you, and I apologize if I missed this at the start, the percent of the universe of eligible students for our district, did you say that? What percent of, if we look at the population eligible to attend public school in Osseo, what percent is homeschool, what percent is charter, what percent is private? Do we have indicators on that?
Yes, yeah, the district provided the ends, the counts for each of the 4 groups, so we could establish the sample size
Okay,
for
what
all
did you
4
say
of those groups.
Where do we have those? Did you say what those numbers
I don't have them on the chart, but I received them from the district, so I could provide them.
Okay, do you know really quick, off the top of your head, what percent of the eligible students who could attend Osseo schools attend? Are we talking about 80% and now the subgroup is 20%, or what are we talking?
I don't know that number. I
That's
know
okay.
the counts of, I could do the number if I had it in front of me, because I know the counts of students and I know the counts of students in the district and students going out of the district.
Okay, thanks. I just was trying to set context.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we could get that. Okay, at the start with this group. At the start, I'll say this. Your outbound parents are favorable towards the district, much more so than we see in other districts that parents have made an adverse choice. Oftentimes, it's a decision against the district or something happening in the district. So when we ask for the evaluation of the quality of education in the district, you have 74% of homeschool parents rating it favorable. You have 53% of private, 55% of other public, and you have 63% of charter school parents all rating it favorably. Now, they're not intensely favorable. It's good versus excellent. Minnesotans always split that way anyways, but it is unique. Typically, it tips amongst outbound parents, there are more people saying only fair or poor than excellent or good. Okay, so they actually do have a positive perception as a whole, a majority in all 4 samples. Now, what comes into play on the next 3 charts is where your child goes in comparison to the Osseo School District. You're gonna think that where they're going is better, okay? So compared to other public schools, is Osseo better, about the same, or worse? Pretty much a wash amongst the homeschool, private schoolers, and charters, with about equal amounts saying better or worse. Those going to other public, they're gonna self-validate. It's rational. 58% say worse, 41% say about the same. What about compared to charter schools? You can see on the charter school, you actually have homeschool and private school netting out plus positive about 10% saying it's better as compared to worse. Other public, that's out negative, but then the charter school parents, more worse than about the same. But even amongst charter school parents, you have 1 in 10 saying it's actually better in Osseo than in charter schools. And then private school, the private school parents, when we look at it, 79% say worse, 15% say better, and even other public and charter school and homeschoolers, about a third to 50% say about worse, with about 40% saying about the same. So really, there's nothing in this that's unique in the sense, except for the fact the charter school group, the homeschool and the private school parents actually seeing a competitive advantage for the Osseo district versus charter schools. Now, as we go in and we ask the parents, what's the reason for selecting the school choice for the child? What's a rate? And now we're going to go through each of the 4 samples individually because the chart would be way too busy trying to do my color coding. What was key for homeschool parents? The number 1 reason was the number of students in the classroom, 31%. Add in the secondary, it's at 37%. But if we add the first and second, you actually have 42% of these parents talking about the programs and offerings. And then you have test scores, 15% impact, 29% reach, and then 13% on student behavior, and impact of 34%. What doesn't matter as much, the red bars, what's least important to homeschool parents, faith-based curriculum, bus transportation, and the number of students in the classroom. What about private school parents? What's their top and second, the most important reason, their second reason, and their least important reason? Programs and offering, split evenly, but a total of 39%. Faith-based curriculum, split equally, 39% reach. The number in classrooms, 19% saying most important, 29% total reach. And the other thing that hits double digits on the most important is the college and career prep at 15%. As a secondary, it's either important to these parents or it's really not that important. But really, we go to the least important for this group, it's bus transportation and culturally relevant teaching at 32 and 26%. What about other public school parents? 3 hit double digits for the most important. Programs and offerings, 24%, a quarter of these parents, with 45% amongst the majority indicating that that's at least a second reason for selecting the school. Test scores matter to these parents, 22% at the total of 34%, and then the number of classrooms, number of students in classrooms, 17 with a total of 32%. What doesn't matter to this group, this is very similar to the homeschool, with it being the faith-based curriculum and the bus transportation. And then finally, with this set of questions, how about charter school parents? Programs and offerings, you have a flat majority, indicating that that was either the first or second reason for choosing their current school, with 53%. And then what comes in second is culturally relevant teaching, with 20% indicating it's most, and 28% it has a reach. The number of students in the classroom follows with 36% total, 19% total reach. The commonality between all 4 in that top, once we hit double digits, we can look at, it's programs and offerings, it's the number of students in the classroom that stays pretty consistent amongst the 4. What comes back, comes in and out, is the culturally relevant teaching, the faith-based curriculum, and test scores, depending on the sample that we're looking at. How important is it to attend a school with many races and cultures? Amongst homeschool, private, and other public, it is 50% amongst homeschool saying it's either very or somewhat important, 50% not too important. Amongst private, it's 71% indicating it's important, with 28% indicating it's not. For other public, it's 81% to 18%, and amongst the charter school parents, with almost a majority indicating it's very important, going back to the demographic mix of that sample will probably be the explanation for that result. What about going the other way? How important is it to attend a school with one race or one culture? All the samples are the same except for the difference in the charter school parents. You actually have almost 1 in 5 indicating that it's very important to attend with one race or culture. And with the demographic makeup of it, it's not surprising that we see that amongst the charter school parents. These charts get busy, so I'm gonna do kind of a big picture takeaway on this. We asked, do they strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree with statements about the Osseo School District? It helps students achieve dreams. It helps students succeed at high levels and everything as we go through. The takeaway is, on every single statement we said about the Osseo School District, a majority of outbound parents agreed with it. And in fact, you have 2/3 on numerous and above 80% on some indicating they agree with these statements. There are a couple that they drop in certain groups. So if we look at the private school parents, still a majority, but 54% indicate that the district helps students succeed at high levels. It also, and the supporting student needs at 61%. The charter school parents also are a bit lower, 58% on supporting students' needs and partnering with families similarly with the private school parents. It nets out with the majority agreeing on all the statements. If there is a comparison though in the amount of agreement, the private and the charter school parents tend to mirror themselves on these statements, much more so than the homeschool and the other public school district parents. What's the most important description to them of what we read? To tap into, kind of getting to the core values again. Amongst homeschoolers, it's effective teaching practices, supporting student needs, excellent teachers, and being a technology leader. If we look at private school, we have students succeeding at high levels, effective teaching practices, supporting student needs, helping students achieve their dreams, and double digits also was offering an extensive array of opportunities for students. Amongst other public school parents, effective teaching practices, supporting student needs, students succeeding at high level, students achieving their dream, and partnering with families. If we look at charter school, it's supporting student needs, succeed at high levels, effective teaching practices, achieving dreams, and excellent teachers. They all, as a sense of priority, not one group had 50% of parents saying, this is the most important description to me. But they all kind of, those that came into the double digits, there was a horse race within them, but the commonalities were supporting students' needs being important to all 4 groups, students succeeding at high levels, having effective teaching practices, and typically excellent teachers. What tended to go into the lower category was being the technology leader, if we look at all of these groups, with at least 26% talking about being a technology leader. Continuing, what was the age of the decision to not enroll? Charter school parents, a majority of, just short of a majority, indicated the child was 5 years or younger before the decision was made to leave the district. Similarly, private school parents follow the same behavior pattern of the charter school parents, with 49% indicating that they chose to leave before the age of 5. Those 2 groups, about half are in play before they actually walk into an Osseo School District building. The other half, they're going elsewhere, looking for something specific. The other public school, they're kind of all over the board. You don't have the common breaks that we would see of middle school and high school level. Pretty much consistent groups amongst all 4 of those categories. Now, what was the primary reason? They can tell it off the top of their head, an open-ended question for sending their child elsewhere. Amongst homeschoolers, it was safety from COVID, 23%. Then child doing poorly at 10%, child being bullied at 9%. Were the 3 that just at double digits or just below double digits. Amongst private school parents, it was 35% faith-based and 15% looking for better academics. Amongst other, going to other public school districts, the number one reason, and this is diversified, there's not a real, 20, 25% of parents saying this is why I made the decision. They're looking for a specific program, 13%. Smaller class sizes, 10%. Better academics, more convenient location, 9%. 6% indicating the child being bullied on that sort of thing. And then similarly, on this one, the charter school parents mirror the other public school parents as opposed to the private school parents, because the faith-based isn't in play for them like it is for the private school parents. What leads the list for those going to other charter schools? It's more diversity and culturally relevant programming. If you combine those two, it's almost 20% amongst charter school parents. What's the most important factor in their decision? Now, on this one, I actually had to break this into two slides. So I'm going to just talk about the highlights for each of the groups. This was a 4-part scale. They had to tell me that this factor was a 4 for them in their decision-making. They could say all of them were 4s. They didn't have to pit the other against. They could pick all of them. They could pick none of them. And so if we look at the homeschool, on this first page, two statements get at 50%. Lower class sizes and looking for a more welcoming school for their child. Amongst private school parents, you have 5 that hit majority. More challenging coursework, attention to basic skills, greater focus on character and values, lower class sizes, and personal attention by staff. If we look at the other public, a lot less people, you don't actually have any hit 50%. A majority of parents saying this is the top reason I sent my child elsewhere. You have 40% indicating more welcoming, personal attention by staff, lower class sizes, and more challenging coursework, all at about 40%. And then amongst charter school parents, you actually have 2, we'll throw in 2 others that just in the mid 40s, personal attention by staff, more welcoming, lower class sizes, greater focus on character and values, and more challenging coursework. Well, the percents might differ. You can see once again the clear themes between all 4 groups, the commonalities, taking away that faith-based value aspect that charter school parents and private school parents are looking for, as opposed to homeschool and other public school parents. Continuing on the list, amongst homeschool parents, the only one hit over 40% was support for student success. That brings back to what we've seen in previous slides. Amongst private school parents, on the second part of this list, support for more student success, better behavior, more racial and ethnic diversity, and being respectful of cultures and experiences. If we look at other public school, once again, they're not as intense in the decision as with the previous slide. Support for student success, support or availability of a specialty program, and then respectful of cultures and experience. And you can see then the charter very much mirrors the private with support for student success and being respectful of cultures and experience. Some new questions we added on, and we asked folks, and they had to tell us they had an elementary school child present. And so we asked how likely would they be to enroll their child in an elementary language immersion school in the district. Not so much. From looking at this as a whole, it's not surprising. They're outbound parents. They're difficult to bring back. If we look at, though, the Chinese immersion and the Hmong immersion, amongst the Hmong immersion, amongst charter school parents, there would be an interest. About 1 in 5 indicated interest. If there's one that has some possibility of parents considering it, it would be a Spanish immersion. But what I tell clients all the time, when you're looking at a likelihood scale, we always look at it at a conservative basis because we have to somehow translate behavior or intention to actual behavior. And there's nothing specific that like, where's it going to be or anything like that. So they're reacting to a concept. And so what we typically tell clients is you take half of the very likely and a quarter of the somewhat likely to give you an estimate. So using that scale, if we go down to the Spanish immersion, let's look at other public school parents. You have 24% saying very likely. Conservatively, 12% might consider it if everything works, in their schedule. 0 said somewhat likely, so we don't even have to quarter it. So as long as it was convenient and where the program was offered, maybe 1 in 8 of these parents would actually move from intention to behavior. How likely are they to enroll there's a student in a high school STEAM program? There is more interest amongst homeschoolers and charter school parents. If we look, using that 50-25, you'd have about 9% of homeschool parents interested. You would have about 5% of private school parents interested. You'd have approximately 8% of other charter or other public, and amongst charter, you would have approximately 13%. Once again, depending on where the high school STEAM program was located. What's the most important communication that they had in making their decision? Bless you. You're going to see the power through this group of the grapevine. The grapevine is alive and lush amongst outbound parents and all 4 of the groups. So the importance of opinions of friends and neighbors goes from 34 to 52%. Marketing materials were very important to private school parents, what they're getting in the mail, and their child's website and the school rating system. Similarly, on other public school, it's not only the opinions of friends and neighbors, it's also school rating and their current school's website. Amongst homeschoolers, it's almost 90% getting their opinions from a friend or a neighbor. Now, we go through, and this will be individual for each, and we ask, when you think about the Osseo area schools compared to your child's current school situation, are the Osseo schools better, worse, or about the same? So amongst homeschool parents, you actually don't have that many. Typically, the red is very strong because they made the decision, so competitively, you only have 2 that actually have a majority saying it's worse. And on that, it's community service opportunities and music, theater, and arts. You actually have over just about half of them where they see no competitive advantage or disadvantage. It's about the same. And you have, we'll put 20% at the threshold and plus or minus 6%. Music, theater, arts, you have 18% saying better. Opportunities in sports, 33% better. Parent involvement opportunities, 25% better. So once again, these folks are not, and that goes back to early on, one of those first slides on the quality of education. They come out favorable in their perception about the Osseo School District's quality of education. What about private school parents? This is typically what we would see on all of these, where you can see there's actually 8 that have 60 or 50% or higher saying that the district's worse. Academic achievement, student behavior, personalizing education, responsiveness to student needs. And if you think back into the reasons for their decisions and what was important to them, the district didn't offer something that they valued in their perception. Where does the private school parents see some sort of advantage to the Osseo School District? Opportunities in sports, access to technology, world language courses, and co-curricular academics. Those going to other public school districts, all but one category, personalizing education, a flat majority said it was about the same. It nets out to the negative, but you have a majority of parents indicating it really is about the same, the quality of education between Osseo and where they're going. And on charter school parents, it's the personalizing of education. And we saw that early on, how important that was to especially parents of charter school. On the flip side, what do they see as an advantage that Osseo has? Music and theater and arts, opportunities in sports, access to technology, co-curricular academics, college career prep, all those sorts of things. But that just goes back to that wasn't in their decision-making matrix on what was the most important thing when they made their decision for their child. If they could give advice, this was open-ended. What would they tell the Osseo School District to focus on to achieve the goal of being a premier choice school in the area. Amongst homeschool parents, they said better personalization from teachers, better student behavior, strong COVID safety rules, and higher test scores. Amongst private school parents, better student behavior, higher test scores. Other public, better student behavior, higher test scores, personalizing education. Charter school parents, personalizing education, culturally relevant programs, better student behavior. You can see commonalities, but the takeaway on this is there's not one thing that's sitting at 50% of people saying, you need to do this. I've been in districts where, especially it seems to revolve around discipline, where half of these parents are gonna say, you need to do something so my kid feels safe in school. So it's not, okay, here's the magic bullet that's gonna fix their perceptions. This is, equate this to for the older folks here, the stereo equalizer, where you just played and tried to make the sound perfect. You've got to do all of these sorts of things, but it's only going to impact certain, 1 in 8 parents. It's not going to impact 4 in 8 parents. So that's the good news, is there's no major problem. The challenge will be focusing on the multitude of things that are important to certain parents in all 4 of these groups. Would they consider enrolling their child back in the Osseo School District? Well, what would make them consider enrolling their child back in the Osseo School District? First off, we go down to the bottom, unsure or nothing. Private school, 74% said there's nothing that would make me consider. Homeschool, 40% said there's nothing that would make me consider, and about half of other public and charter school. This is unique, and we've seen this during the pandemic. Typically, when we've done outbound surveys in the past, once parents make a decision, they're gone. It's typically between 80 and 90% that say there's nothing that's gonna bring me back. Amongst the other public, charter, and homeschool, you have about 50% that would consider coming back. The problem is what would bring them back? And there's no clear, nothing hits double digits again. For homeschool, you can see the impact of COVID. That it was a factor early on in the open-ended on their decision on, to keep their child homeschooled, but there really is no clear direction. You just have many more people considering. And we've seen this in other districts that have done outbound surveys during the course of the pandemic. A lot of the decisions were made, and people were looking for, homeschool parents, they were looking for safety. People made decisions to send their child to private schools so the kid could go in person. And so all of those things competing, this is very similar that for about half of the parents, the district did nothing wrong. They were searching for something that the district couldn't provide during the pandemic, whether it was complete distance learning or complete in person with no mask. There was that tension. So it follows a typical pattern. It's actually, I was surprised that you actually had 26% of private school parents said, maybe. That typically is 95%, and the only time we ever saw that drop down below 90% was about 2010 with the recession, when the cost of tuition became difficult. So there is some flexibility with this group, much more than we've seen in the past. Final section on this, communications. Where are they getting their information? Major source, friends and family, 85% of homeschool parents. Amongst private school parents, 97% opinions of friends and family. Amongst other public, okay, they're getting information from postcard mailings, district website, friends and family, and parents of district children. They're more diversified, but you still have the grapevine in there for about 80%. And then charter school parents, it's 88%, with 2/3 of them indicating it's a major source of information. In all of these groups, the key is the word of mouth amongst parents in the district, with children in the district, and then friends and neighbors and their opinion of the district impacting this group much more, all four of these groups, much more than you're gonna see in your district parent portion of the survey. And then what source do they use most for information about education? Once again, there's really no clear, and they could tell us whatever. You know, you would hope it would go more towards mailings or website, but it tips about half indicating, about a quarter indicating mailings, about a quarter indicating website, and about half to 40% indicating somebody else. I want my information from a person. That's the end of that one. Any questions while I set up the next one in general?
Do you have
Are-
any questions?
Are we doing a round of questions
Yeah, we
now,
can.
or?
Do you want us to, wait, do you wanna do it now, or do you wanna?
Why don't we do some questions now, since we've got the outbound,
Sure.
before we go into the parent
All
part?
right,
Yeah.
I'll start with you, Tamara, we'll just gonna go down.
Come back to me.
Okay,
Thank you.
then whoever wants to go on this.
I think I just have more comments than anything, so it can come back to me as well.
Jackie?
I really don't have questions, other than, it'd be nice to know what our, overall percentages of how many families go of our district. Essentially what, Tanya asked earlier, to have that background, very thorough.
Yeah, I have a few questions. On culturally relevant, how do we think about language? Does that fall into programming or culturally relevant? Because I know some alternatives offer kind of both the culture specific with the language. So could it fall in both, or did,
It was program,
That fell under
culturally
program.
relevant programs was the wording used on the survey.
okay. So those are two different line items, culturally relevant programming versus other programming?
Yes,
Okay,
when you see that. And we did on one of the lists talk about world language programs also, to pull out the language part, as opposed to just the broader culturally relevant programs was attached to that.
okay, got it. And then, so for the COVID reasons, was it specifically safety or other COVID measures? Was there a delineation? Because just like we hear different perspectives from families in our district, families have different perspectives for what they felt the COVID measures or mitigation factors were that might cause them to homeschool. So for example, maybe the student had a compromised health situation that couldn't come into the school, or maybe the parents didn't want them to have to deal with masking, and so they kept them at home. So was that particular bucket, was there clarity on what specifically about COVID was keeping them in homeschool, or was helping them to choose homeschooling?
It was the safety from COVID amongst homeschool parents. It wasn't that for their decision for last school year, nobody said in the sample that I homeschooled my child because I didn't want him to wear a mask.
Nobody said that in the sample?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
there might be, but in the sample, the homeschool parents, and we've seen it in other districts when we look at homeschool parents, the primary reason they kept their kid from home is for all the reasons that you said former. It was about, they were worried about COVID, their child's safety, and all of those aspects for last school year.
Okay.
This school year,
That's good clarity.
safe.
Okay. And then on the word of mouth, is that, those measures, is that unique to Osseo based on what you've seen, or is that similar to other districts?
The actual reach, when you have basically 8 out of 10 parents, that's about 20 points higher than the norm. I mean, this group is going to talk amongst themselves. These groups, actually, you have 4 different samples. So that's not uncommon, but it almost feels like they're in an echo chamber.
Yeah. I remember us talking about this the last time, so I just wanted to
Yeah.
understand that again. Okay, perfect, got it, thank you.
That was my question.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's, I don't have anything else. No.
All
Oh,
right.
sorry.
I just, the thing I noticed the most is that parents are leaving because they want smaller class sizes, which we don't have total control over. But what that, it means to me is it also connects to children, parents wanting programs that, and support that are individualized for their children.
Right.
So I find that really interesting. And then also that private school and charter schools decisions are made early. It seems like homeschooling is response to situations not going well in school, perhaps. And I can speak to that for my own children. And then I had a question about, or maybe a comment about culturally relevant teaching and diversity. It does appear that we're losing some of our students to charter schools because they offer more robust, culturally relevant or language immersion. And so that might be something for us to continue to develop so that we can retain those students, because we do have those programs here.
If I could, I know there wasn't a question in there, but I just,
Yeah.
with your point, because it's there's always that tension on the size of the number of students in the classroom. And I'll put this out there, when you have so many people getting their opinions from other people, okay, the grapevine on this one, they hear, hey, my kid had 45 kids in their math class, or whatever. They don't have any experience with that. So it really is important with communications to talk about what's an acceptable class size. We've started to test it in surveys. We used to just ask, how would you rate class sizes? Now we'll say the average class size in elementary school is 25 kids. Too many, about the right amount, or is it low? And you get actual reaction to fact. And what we typically hear on this is that's much lower than what I'm hearing. And so that definitely is something to keep in mind because of the power of the grapevine amongst those groups. Perhaps facts. The other thing that districts do on this is because, in some district surveys, we've gone in and said, okay, it costs X $100,000 to decrease the class sizes by 1. Would you support a property tax increase for that amount of money? Or they could do better social and emotional programming. You could do all of these other things. And when you tell somebody your class sizes are 26, it costs this much money to go to 25, parents make the calculation and the residents make the calculation, that's not worth it. We look over here, personalizing education and everything. Because in their perfect mind, those that are really concerned about class sizes, it's 15. You'd have to build twice the number of buildings and everything like that. So really, it's been an important part of the communications is to explain for districts where class sizes is a concern, what they currently are, and how much it would cost to impact the class sizes. And going from 26 to 25 is a distinction without a difference for a lot of parents.
Okay, thanks. That clarifies that. So what you're saying is that the number of students or the classroom sizes is a perception issue rather than one grounded in reality, because somebody tells anecdotally a story of 40 kids in a math class, and then that becomes the standard by which all class sizes are judged.
It tends to be, but then also when you have 8 out of 10 people getting their information from friends or neighbors, it definitely, that's, whether their information is accurate is the key.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Can I follow up to Tamara? Thanks. In the question on culturally relevant programming, et cetera, did you find, you may not have this data in front of you, did you find that most of them were from a particular culture, or is it because of the Hmong schools in our district, or was there other factors?
If they indicated they're if they were Asian and they spoke Hmong, they were more likely, they valued the culturally relevant programming. And they also, you had that 1 in 5 on that chart that indicated that it was very important to go to school with just one race or culture.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
That was the
because,
demographic, I cut that.
Yep. Okay.
Did that demographic cut.
I think I just had some general comments, and I may have more questions after the next presentation, but there's a lot to process in here.
Yeah.
One, because in many ways it shows that we are doing many things very well in the district, but we have a huge issue with perception. And I know that there are nuances, and some of those perceptions, negative perceptions, are actually realities in some of our schools. And you know, right now we've been getting a lot of questions about class sizes in fifth grade, which is a huge concern in the district. But it sort of made me think about the mailings that I have been receiving, or the marketing materials that I've seen around town, and I can see how those marketing pieces, or the word of mouth from neighbors, friends, and family, could help influence a decision to go elsewhere, to a private or charter school. I don't know that as a district we do as great of a job in communications, to talk about what we do well, and the programs and services that we do offer. To Tamara's point, we do have the Hmong Heritage Program, and Spanish program. And I do, you know, on one hand, I'm sure we need to strengthen those programs in order to compete with some of those charter schools. But we do have those programs, and I'm not sure how well that's being communicated. So I think all of this is just to say there's a huge issue with perception in the district, and I wonder what our communication strategy will be, knowing that this is a primary reason why we're losing many of our families before they even step foot into a building. But that's it for now. I'll wait till the next one.
All right. Try to go through this one a little bit quicker. 75 minutes is. I'm sorry, everyone. All right. Parents in the district. Broke them into 3 samples. 250 parents attending their assigned school building, 250 doing in-district transfer, 206 of your inbound parents, the outbound of other districts. 206 is plus or minus 6.3, because I believe the universe on this one was about 1,700 students. So once again, we can balance, so it's all plus or minus 6.3%. Took a little bit lower. And we actually had 19 codes for languages spoken in the district amongst parents. But I collapsed those down. It was one of various languages. Once again, on that in-district transfer, they're much more highly educated. They're older, and they're making a decision to send their kid to the not assigned school. And similarly with the inbound, they're much more educated at 26%. You see the gender breakdown, about 4 and 10 in each group. The inbound, the decisions being made, they're more likely to have a high school student as they come into the district, as opposed to an elementary or middle school parent. In the in-district transfer, they're about the same as the assign on having an elementary school child. Key difference on the inbound is the decisions being made at high school, much more so than the other, having a child in the other grade levels. What do they like most about the district? We can get through some of these charts because there's a commonality. Good teachers. Basically, nets out to about 30% amongst all 3 groups. Followed by, you can see the impact of the inbound and the transfer on the variety of programs. 1 and 6 are making the decision because they're going someplace else in the district than their assigned school. Not as important to those that their children are attending their assigned school. Diversity also matters with in-district transfer. 1 in 8 of those parents. Welcoming was important to the assign and the district transfer. But those are the key takeaways. Now, what's the biggest challenge facing the Osseo School District? First off, this is open-ended, they can tell us anything. 25%. We consider if you have 1 in 4, 1 in 5 parents coalescing around one thing, that's a major concern in the district. You don't have anything that goes above 15%. Once again, you have what we would call concerns, not major concerns. What are those concerns? The COVID pandemic. At the time of this survey, so this is June and July, we're early, we're not talking about opening schools in the fall, about 1 in 10. Diversity issues, about 1 in 10 for those residents that live in the district, half that amongst those inbound parents. Large class sizes, the in-district transfer must have found what they wanted because it wasn't a concern for those, about 1 in 10 concerned for assigned and inbound. If we go to the bottom though, 26% of assigned parents said there are no problems or I can't think of one. Amongst in-district transfer, 30% said I'm unsure, I can't think of one. And if we go to those that made the decision to come in, almost 40% say unsure, I can't think of one. Typically, parents are the harshest critics. They know the most. So typically, the nothings on these are between 4 and 8%, to give you an idea. So you do have about twice the amount and 3 times the amount of boosters amongst parents at this point in time in June and July. What's the overall quality of education? Now this starts very different than the outbound. First off, look at the excellent. You have 4 out of 10 rating the district excellent. The assigned 84%, the in-district transfer 95, and the inbound 92. So it nets out to, if we weight this, it's about 90% favorable, and it's about 40% excellent. The 40% excellent, the norm amongst all parents in the metro area, when we look at the excellent versus the good, comes in at about 30%, so about 10 points higher than the norm. How do they feel about the Osseo School District compared to other public school districts? Amongst all 3 groups, you have approximately 45 to 50% indicating it's better. You have about 35%, if we net it out, saying about the same, and you have about 7% saying worse. And this one we always look at as a percentage. If we say 45 to 7, roughly is the ratio, saying better to worse, nets out as 6 to 1, indicating that the district's better than other public school districts. The norm on this one has dropped from before the pandemic, so it's 2 to 1. And there are districts that actually say we're doing worse than neighboring school districts at this point in time. So your current parents do feel positive about the direction the schools are taking. What was the reason for selecting their school? We'll go through this quickly. Amongst the assigned college career prep, number of students in the classroom, academic programs and offerings. What's not important to the assigned, bus transportation. In-district transfer, college and career prep, academic programs and offerings, number of students in the classroom. Once again, what's not important to the in-district transfer, bus transportation, but also test scores. A quarter of them, it's not important. And then on the inbound, this is always the one I kind of like to focus on as we look at the decision making, because this is what's bringing them in. This is the competition to the first presentation we saw. So what brought them in? 45% said the academic programs and offerings. 36% said college and career preparation for students. Test scores, 30%. Number of students in the classroom, 32%. Graduation rates, 24%. So you do have this tension you can see about parents making an adverse decision from this district to go elsewhere versus parents in another district making a decision to come here and those parents seeking the same thing that those that left. It's kind of a circular rodeo. How important is it to attend a school with many races and cultures? It's important to all groups. 87%, about 85% across the group. 2/3 in the assigned and in-district transfer saying it's very important. What about to attend a school with one race or culture? The inbound, a little bit of an uptick, but across the board, 2/3 and approaching 90% in the district residents, indicating that's not too important. What's the main reason they send their child to their current school? The assigned, they're just, okay, yeah, I send my child to the neighborhood school, 43%. And the convenient location, pretty much typical responses. What about those that are choosing to transfer within the district? Number one reason they're seeking a specific program, 25%. 14% talk about the in-district transfer is a more convenient location than their assigned school. Those two are double digits. What's the reason for the inbound parent to come? The convenient location, obviously, as these districts were drawn, the boundaries years ago, there is a convenience factor. But they also mention teachers. They talk about specific programs, the reputation, the family and friends attend, meeting children's needs. Similarly, that we did with the outbound, we went through and asked this list of agreement with the statements about the Osseo School District. On this one, the lowest amount of agreement is 81% about partnering with families. So at least 8 out of 10 parents in all three groups agree, and you almost have, you didn't have any hit 100%, it's plus or minus 6%, but you have 98, 97% agreement on all of these. Now, you have agreement on all of them, but what's the most important statement that we read? For those attending their assigned school, it's helping students achieve their dreams, helping students succeed, effective teaching practices, and excellent teachers. For in-district transfer, helping students succeed, effective teaching practices, helping students achieve their dreams, supporting student needs, and excellent teachers. And once again, for the inbound, those coming in, they achieve the dreams, succeed, effective teaching practices. Basically, there's a commonality amongst all three groups on what's the most important, but most importantly is 90% of each group agree with what's most important to them. What's the importance of next generation learning spaces? We gave a brief description, and we said, is it very important, somewhat important, or not too important for elementary schools to have these spaces, middle schools to have these spaces, and high schools to have these spaces? It nets out, if you look at the very and somewhat, all levels it's deemed as important. There is an intensity when it goes, elementary schools, it's more split on the very versus somewhat important. On the middle schools, you have a lot less people saying not too important, and you have a little bit of a skew towards the very important. For high schools, it's overwhelming. 75% or higher in all three groups say it is very important, and you have 5% netting out not important amongst all three groups. Enrollment in elementary language immersion school. Now, there is more interest amongst your current parents than there were amongst the outbound parents, not surprisingly. On the Chinese immersion, the English language school, you have about between 25 and 30% indicating they're very or somewhat likely. You can do that 50% and the 25% split for the potentiality. A little bit less amongst the Hmong immersion. The one that has the most interest is the Spanish immersion, with actually the in-district transfer, keeping in mind that they've already moved, with 43% indicating they're very likely and 33% somewhat likely. We know that they're willing to transfer their children. That would put in play perhaps even up to about a third of those parents. Enrollment in STEAM, equal interest and very high interest. The devil will be in the details, obviously, of where it's located and everything like that. But you have 50%, actually almost 60% of both of your current resident parents indicating they would be very likely to consider that option. District characteristics, how would they rate the district? Excellent, good, only fair, poor, on a series of statements. On range of course offerings, Norm comes in at about 73%. Basic academic coursework comes out to about 84%. Music and theater arts comes out amongst all parents normalized at about 67%. College and career prep, you can see the inbound parents on all of these are much more positive. So that goes back to the previous outbound. There is a self-validation for their decision in that sense. The access to technology, pretty much equal. Academic achievement, pretty much equal, coming in about 82, 83%. You can see the difference in personalizing education. And keep in mind that personalizing education for the outbound. Your inbound parents rate the district at 87% for making the decision coming in. And then extracurricular and sports, about 73% nets out. Continuing, quality teaching staff, consistency across the board, 9 out of 10. Character development, 3/4 of residents, almost 90% of inbound. Student behavior, you saw that there was the concern amongst outbound, not as much a concern about those that actually have an experience with the district. You can see test scores. You did have a lot of uncertainty on this one because obviously there weren't a lot of tests taken last year for comparison. Responsiveness to students' needs. This is another thing that's in competition to the perception out there amongst the outbound parents. Career tech and world language, you have less people rating those amongst the current residents simply because they're looking back over the past school year and some of those things weren't offered. We look at the unfavorable portion of this, the range of course, we'll go through this quickly. The extracurricular and sports, the in-district transfer, about 20% unfavorable. The personalizing education, it's about 23% unfavorable. And music, theater, and arts, it's about 20%. Continuing the student behavior, it's a concern amongst your current parents for approximately, comes in at about 21%. And the test scores, you have a higher amount saying unsure, but a concern if it nets out at about 18%. What's the most important characteristic that we've gone through? Amongst the assigned parents, it's college and career prep, and basic academic coursework, academic achievement, the quality of the teaching staff, and range of course offerings and personalizing education. There's a commonality with the values of parents choosing elsewhere. It's just how they look at their decision and how they evaluate the district. Amongst the in-district transfers, it's teaching staff, personalizing education, the range of course offerings, college and career prep, basic academic coursework. And on the inbound, basic academic coursework, range of course offerings, and college and career. You can see though, there's not one or two that dominate. You have certain parents in all these groups that are resonating on things all the way down to specifics on the career development or student behavior, or test scores, and everything like that. But there are commonalities at the top. If they think about their child's youngest school, do they think that their child's school provides ideas for children's success in school? That's out at about 73% agreement, about 8% disagreement, and about 12% indicating sometimes. Provides safe learning environment, 9 out of 10 in all groups indicate that's the case. Respectful, 88% in all three groups indicate that was the case. Do adults care about your child? This one gave them a 4-part, so they could answer strongly yes, yes, no, strongly no, or sometimes. Nobody said strongly no. Amongst the current residents, it's 6 out of 10 strongly agree with that statement. It nets out the positive, comes in at approximately 92%. Are the children's teachers highly skilled and effective? Nets out at 85% amongst all three groups, with approximately 11% indicating sometimes. Respectful to students' culture and life experiences, 84% indicate that that's the case, with 10% indicating sometimes. Monitoring progress adequately. This is always difficult for districts even before the pandemic, and it continues to be looking at other districts. You actually do a pretty good job on this one, on the monitoring progress. The norm in other districts is about 66% agreeing that the district is adequately. They don't go into the no category, they go into the sometimes category. So you have less people saying sometimes and more people saying yes, more parents saying yes. And then having learning needs met comes in at about 3/4, with about 18% indicating sometimes. Adequate communication, that also has been difficult during the pandemic. You have to be everything to everybody. And this district's done a very nice job with current parents on providing adequate education. Feeling welcome, 9 out of 10. Feeling accepted, 9 out of 10. Where's the sources of information? Now you're going to see the difference between outbound and current parents. Number one, for the assigned parents, it's the district website, district staff, and then we get into the friends and the family and district parents. In-district transfer, district website, district staff, parents, postcard mailings, then we have friends and family. Inbound, district website, postcard mailings, district staff. The parents are getting their information from the district, whether it's from a person, a piece of paper, or on an electronic device. Got through in 74 minutes.
Nice.
But I'm more than happy to answer any more questions you have.
All right, does anybody have anything that they need, thank you so much. Does anybody have any comments, questions, reflections they want to share?
Go ahead.
I just want to say thanks to all of our teachers who are so highly rated and keep our students here and bring our students in. That speaks a lot to our system and the adults that we have taking care of our children, so thank you.
I did have a question. Do you have any, did you get any qualitative information on the STEAM program? Sorry, it's me.
I'm sorry, I wasn't sure with the mask who was talking.
I know, right?
I didn't know who to look at.
I like it way down here.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so with, did you get any qualitative on the STEAM locations that were at all?
No.
Because you kept saying depending on the location.
Yeah, we followed up. Let me just pull that out.
I'm just curious because we have a middle school with a STEAM program and I didn't know it.
So, what I arrayed on the chart, and I couldn't figure out how to array the second part with all the three groups and everything. The question, I'll read the questions just so everybody knows how it was. Some families have expressed interest in a high school science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, or STEAM program. This program might be connected to a local community college, offering students the opportunity to take college courses in high school, creating a clear pathway to college after high school graduation. If the Osseo School District were to offer such a program in one of its current high schools, would you be very likely, somewhat likely, or not too likely? So that's what was arrayed on the very somewhat and not too likely on the chart. We followed up with those that said very or somewhat likely. So they're already willing to consider the STEAM program and say, what if the program were offered off-site at a local community college? Would you be very likely, somewhat likely, or not too likely to enroll your child? And there was very little. You had about 5 to 10% in all three groups saying, going to a local college, I'm not as likely. So the difference, we didn't get into the specific, you wanted at Maple Grove or Osseo or anything like that, but that local community college versus high school, there'd be a preference for the high school, but there's not a lot of attrition if it is off-site.
Sure, thank you for clarifying
Anybody?
I think I'll be quick. So I think very similar to the last presentation, this one pointed to the same common theme of issues with perception and communication in general. But also highlighted again that we do a lot well. One of the things that I thought was interesting is the convenient location between inbound and outbound. We live, in my opinion, in a highly competitive district because it's nearly impossible to drive any significant difference and not cross through another district.
Right.
And so I think one of the things that I sort of wondered is how this could potentially look different in a larger school district that doesn't have so much overlap in every corner. And I know as you went through the first presentation, you talked a little bit about how our district compares to others, but yeah, I think that's one of the things that's in my mind is just what does that look like for a school district that doesn't have so much competition within its boundaries?
The competition, especially being charter schools?
Well,
in your
charter
case?
schools are, yes, a
Yeah,
huge
you-
competitor, but it's also neighboring school districts. So depending on where you are in the district, you may live closer to
Right.
a neighboring school district. Yeah, and I mean, that's the case anywhere in our district. It's just, that's how weird the boundaries are.
Yeah, I mean, it's the metro area. In essence,
Yep.
certain parts of the metro area on outbound. There are some school districts that are much more aggressive in marketing to parents in another school district. You don't have that district next to you. Close, but down the road a little bit, in that sense. So, and especially, I would say, if we look at the metro area, you are on the side of the metro area, just going north to south between basically Highway 100 and, I don't know, 101, of a lot of competition all the way down from the Mississippi River to the north and the Minnesota River to the south. I mean, this really is a competitive portion for parents to make the decision. You know, from Eden Prairie all the way up to Anoka Hennepin to your north. And a lot of that is because when they drew these boundaries, whenever these years ago, you're splitting farms and everything like that, and you have, as you place schools, there are many districts or many schools that you're actually closer to going to another district
Yeah.
than you are going to your child's assigned school.
Yeah, and I mean, that's me. When I look at this, I think about, I think one of the things I think about is we often get caught up in what we're not doing well. And because of that, I think our goal and our vision is to be the best at everything. And as we look at some of this data and what our communication strategy will be, assuming that we do respond and act drastically different than we have been, I don't know that we can successfully do well at everything. And so we can't be all things to all families in the district as much as we try. And so I do think some more discussion needs to happen as to what we want our identity to be and what do we really want to do well at, to be competitive with whoever we decide to be competitive with. So if that's the charter schools or neighboring school districts, or if it's private, however this district or this board decides to go, I do think we need to maybe hone in on that and not try to be all things to all families. We are already doing quite a bit well, and the negative data that we see in here, I think we all know, and we've been talking about, we've been concerned about it. So I think that's just where my mind is how can we better focus on just a few things and do those really well, to be competitive with, again, whoever we decide to be competitive with, and drastically change how we communicate and brand our district and our schools individually.
Make a few points. Yeah, I agree with you. Make a couple of broad points on that. You have the benefit of, amongst current parents, you don't have to make them feel differently. You have to make them feel even better than they do. It's not a conversion. You don't have to fix things. You have to move them from good to excellent, agree to strongly agree. And that's a much better position. You also, I've been doing this 27 years. I can think of a handful of school districts that when they do the outbound parents and they pit them against the current parents, what the outbound parents want is nothing that the current parents want. And when you have that tension, to your point, you can't be everything to everybody. Because if you try to accommodate those that have gone elsewhere and you alienate your current parents that then say, I'm going to go someplace else, but you don't have that. You do have an alignment on those core values for so many groups that I think in communication and sharing and with the perceptions and everything, you're going to intensify the positive feelings amongst parents, and you're going to give outbound parents more information about issues that they've said are important to them. And that could potentially, we know from the data, about half of them would come back under the right circumstances. So while you can't be all things to everybody, you are in a good position to be able to kill two birds with one stone, shall we say.
Yep, and I think that gets back to, well, I agree, and I think that gets back to my point about communicating what we are doing well. However, I think just one last thing is, I always get a little nervous when I see surveys like this, results like this that are so overwhelmingly positive, because I don't want us to lose track of those negative situations that we do often get caught up in, but that are oftentimes legitimate and valid. I think there are some real issues that we do need to address in here that may not look as prominent because, again, so much of it is positive, but that we also need to address. As you said, we're looking to change some of those agree to strongly agree or so on and so forth. So, yeah, improving our communication strategy, doing what we do well even better, but also, I think, figuring out what our identity is and what we want to do well and who we're able to represent, I think, more importantly, because like you said, we can't be all things to all families. And that's clear in the data. That's it. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you.
Nothing else?
Okay, so yeah, piggybacking on those comments, so certainly this really comes down to reflecting that at the end of the day, the things that families care about is their experience every day in the classroom for their kids, and that comes down to the teacher and the students. And so that's really awesome to see the positive reflection on our teachers, and I think we know that in our work. I think that we've always said that we want to make sure that our teachers are competitively compensated, that we want to have an environment where teachers want to be here. So I think that goes hand in hand too. So the great work that the teachers are doing, and that we need to continue to demonstrate that appreciation for what they do for our students every day, and that's what parents care about. I think the other thing this reflects that it's really about results for parents. It's about the college and career prep, the academic programs, graduation rates, like these fundamentally the core reasons why kids are in school and attend school is what parents are primarily interested in. I think, to me, I do see a couple issues, and again, having seen this now a few times, it's great to see the consistency. It is good to see the positive. There's some things that we know that aren't necessarily changing, but that we need to continue to tap into, like you said, to move from good to great, or good to excellent. So I think this actually is pretty well aligned with the work that we're doing in our strategic plan as well. I think it's interesting that character and values was one that was a little bit more unfavorable on the list, and that's interesting because every single school you walk into, you can see the values, you can see the character work that's on the walls. So hopefully our strategic planning work that now puts those front and center and says this is what we care about as a district and can cascade through and kind of bring that together. It might be an opportunity for us to share that more broadly with our families, both in the district and those that are choosing other options. I think the discipline issue is one that we need to really begin to think about. While it's great that we've got 75% favorable, I think it was about 25% of assigned that was unfavorable. I think that's one that we do need to begin talking about as a board. We haven't really addressed that over the last few years that I've been on the board. So I think that that's something that we do need to dig into soon from my perspective. Yeah, those are my questions and comments. So again, very in-depth work. It's fantastic, and I think this just reemphasizes our strategic work and continue to focus on excellence and the everyday experience of our students in the classroom. So thank you.
My colleagues have already asked a lot of really good questions and made some comments very similar to what I was going to say. Lots of really positive information in here. The one thing that I want to touch on, just in the interest of time, I won't repeat everything that everyone else just said, but when we get to the last couple of slides, sources of information, I could be wrong, but do you happen to have the information from 2016? I feel like the district website and these types of communications were not this highly rated the last time we did this.
I don't have them with me.
I know,
And I would have loved, I debated, the charts are already so busy, I'd love to do a comparison, but I have that data, so we can get that for you.
Okay,
Yes.
I was just curious because I know that since the last time we did this, and now we've kind of revamped our website and made some changes because that was an area of concern.
Yep.
So I would just be curious to see if the changes that we made had the impact that I think that it did.
Yeah.
So, that's it, thank you.
Well, and I just would like to thank you as well. You know, I think for me, you know, especially this last 18 months, it's, you know, I'm really pleased to see our caregiver survey that, excuse me, it is a positive spin. I think that this is it's really timely to see this right now, as Tanya, Director Simons mentioned, just going into really solidifying our strategic priorities, because there's some things that really, you know, really stick out to me around just the immersion programs and just different curriculums that we have, as well as really laying out our visions and priorities, that we really are building on a really strong and solid foundation. And so I think that is, you know, I think about all the, you know, some of the remarks. I mean, I know I've just seen our teachers, ESPs, principals, like when we're in parades, if I'm at the store, it's like celebrity sightings, you know? I mean, it's really, it's awesome. I mean, that's what it's really all about, you know, and our scholars, that connection with an adult, and to have our caregivers reflect that in their survey, I think it's pretty phenomenal. I especially, you know, coming off of a year that has been really wrought with a lot of different issues that we're not as used to facing, you know, within our education system, and you know, and I just kind of segue into this to say that last Friday at AMSD, Peter and Bill presented a survey, a public opinion survey, and that really covered kind of a wide range of issues around like COVID and mitigation measures, the state of the education, our economy, and just kind of the whole kind of spectrum where we kind of different trends across the state. And I know we don't have a lot of time now, but even to share that, if you know, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that and how it really correlates with what you're seeing with some of the caregiver and parent surveys, but I do think, you know, you can't look at one kind of without what's happening in our state. So I just want to know if you have any insights around that.
I'll give you like a minute on
Okay.
it, because there's, you know, the title of it, and it's, I believe AMSD shared it, the
Yeah.
political ad upon, you know, looking at differences. And what we found in the survey, the overarching goal of this research was to help school districts as they look forward to November elections or elections next year, and to understand the current climate with everything going on. Now, the survey was conducted in the middle of August, so we actually had a whole bunch more issues happen nationally, and you know, it was like whack-a-mole keeping up. But what we found is, overall, it really didn't matter where you lived, and demographics didn't matter as much as your political ID, who you listen to, creating the lens that you viewed the world. And so you had these tensions. You know, we asked a series of questions to come up with profiles of those that were supporting of defund the police, to those that are against masking, to those that were pro-Trump, all of those, to understand the groups. And at times it feels like there's 100% on any of these groups, because that's all you hear from. It's about 15 to 25%. But that 15 to 25% feels so strongly, and they don't have a lot of demographic comparisons. It's not northern Minnesota versus West Metro or anything like that. It's how they view politically and where they get their news that's impacting it so much. So it's kind of the key takeaway to keep in mind, because I think oftentimes for a school board or a city council, you feel like from what you hear and see, it's 100%. But it is an environment also that there's so much hostility from both sides that if somebody disagrees, they're more than likely to just do so quietly for the most part. So, but that presentation's available, I think, from AMSD.
I can make sure I send it to
Yeah.
everybody, or Corey. You are going to. Corey's on it already. All right, Corey, do you have anything else?
No, I know we're tight on time, so
Yep.
we'll circle back on
Okay.
some of these themes. But I would say in general, it's nice to hear some really,
Yeah.
I mean, we're so focused on continuous improvement, is to take a moment and celebrate. There's a lot of good things happening during a really tough time, and that's a really great springboard for us to get even better,
Yep.
right? That's what our commitment is, so.
All right, thank you, Peter.
9 points and 18 points. Just to answer your question, Director Douglas, on the website, Kay came up with it. Above the board, it looks like approximately 15 to 20% increase on the website of parents in all three groups saying a major source of information.
That's great news, thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll transition this.
Okay.
Thank you to John and Kelly for being patient and waiting. Thank you, Peter, for being with us tonight. We probably could have stolen another hour from him and
Yeah.
still not covered all the ground. So if there are questions as follow-up board members, please funnel those to me because we can get those to Peter for any additional information that we want, because I think you got more questions than you're able to answer tonight. I'm going to turn it over to John and Kelly to update you on the budget item for tonight. I'm going to buy you some time, John.
Thank you.
It's first official presentation, no pressure.
All right. Well, good evening, Chair Dawson Walton, Superintendent McIntyre, and board members. This evening, we just wanted to take a few minutes to kind of set the stage for you on the levy process for 2021 payable in 2022, which is a very important component of the fiscal year 23 budget. Well, we don't really have any concrete data we can share at this point, since we're still waiting on the Department of Education to work through all the levy details. We did want to prepare the board for what you can expect at December 28th meeting when you will be voting and approving a levy. To get us started, I'd like to start by introducing Kelly Benusa, our Director of Business Services, who is going to walk us through the budget process and where the levy fits into that. Kelly?
Okay, so the first item we're reviewing tonight is the fiscal year 2023 budget planning timeline for operating fund budgets. We're starting the long-range financial planning process for fiscal year 2023 budget planning. This is a model that's worked well for us over time, and tonight we want to take time to ensure that the board is aware of what staff will be doing over the next several months. The timeline should look familiar. I'd like to point out the items highlighted in blue. This is where the board's required to take action on the budget items. The first date is September 28th, and this is the first step in our revenue process. This process will then culminate with the June 21st board approval of the adopted budgets for fiscal years 2023. So the next document is the Long-Range Financial Planning, or LRFP, Budget Tentative Development Visual Timeline. This timeline begins on October 27th, when budget managers receive preliminary budget direction. There are 49 working days in total until December 16th, which is the Operating Funds Program Efficiency, Abandonment, and Redirection, or PARE Narrative Request deadline. The board action on this document is in red. On December 14th, the final levy is certified. February 22nd is the fiscal year 2023 operating funds budget adjustments, and also the capital expenditure budgets are approved. And then on June 21st, the board adopts the fiscal year 2023 budget for all funds. And with that, I'll turn the presentation back over to John.
Thank you. So now we'll take a little bit more in-depth look at the levy process. This first diagram will help us kind of take a walk through the timeline. So at the top, you're looking at what happens in July and August. Primarily, we're gathering data and submitting it to MDE. So those pieces include community population data, some LTFM planning, the average daily membership estimates that we do for the proposed year and the 2 years beyond that, various lease amounts, our debt service schedules, and also some transportation data. All of this information MDE will use to calculate our initial levy numbers. And as you get to the middle portion, they're committed to, by September 8th, certifying the levy to us. And then at that point, basically, business managers throughout the state are taking the chance to look through the information that they provide, verify it for accuracy, and make, ask for, there are some things that get changed regularly. It's a very complicated process, so it's not unusual that we get multiple runs of this, typically on a daily or every couple day basis, until they get the information right. I kind of describe it as a cone working its way tighter and tighter and tighter, that because of the complicated nature of it, MDE is working to kind of get everything in line so it can be ready at the end, and then ultimately, when boards are voting in December, we're voting on very accurate, verified data, so you have the ability to make a sound decision. As we kind of continue across, September 9th, MASBO, in conjunction with the Minnesota Department of Ed, did a tax levy workshop to really walk through all the detail and explain the framework of the process. The September 14th meeting here, as we're kind of walking you through how that looks for our district. Again, as Director Banusa highlighted, that items in red would require board action. So starting with the 28th, we're going to ask that you certify that preliminary levy, and I'll explain the at the max part in just a moment here. And then on the 30th of September is the deadline for all districts to have submitted that approved information to MDE. And again, for the boards can have passed, obviously, our board date, but till the 30th to certify that levy. When we talk about certifying the maximum, that's what we're going to ask you. You basically have two options when we get to the September 28th meeting, which is to certify a dollar amount or to certify the maximum. That sounds kind of scary because most people read the maximum. Well, I want the maximum. Who doesn't want that? What we're asking for is the maximum flexibility that the district can allow. When I kind of go back to that cone, MD is trying their best and doing their best, but there are still errors and there's still things that aren't quite right when we're here in September. I mean, as you're looking on this list and looking at the yellow arrows, we have 17 working days from the day they certify the levy to us until the day that we have to have it submitted back to them. And there's a lot of information to process in there. So the flexibility is really what we're asking for. And again, we are aiming to try to provide you with the best information possible in December to be able to make that decision accurately. You still have full discretion at that point. You still have the ability to under levy or levy less than the maximum amount. The biggest difference is if you pick a dollar amount. You say we're going to levy $20 million, and we find an error or something that was calculated incorrectly, and we were actually eligible for $21 million, we're no longer eligible for $21 million. We're eligible for 20. So you kind of lock a cap at the top. So that's the reason why we're going to ask for that. So moving to the last section, you're going to see if there was an election this year for us in November, if you were doing say an operating referendum, that's when it has to be done, is at a November election. Then I'm going to move to the November 24th date, which is a deadline for the county auditors to prepare and the treasurers to deliver to you by mail your proposed tax levy. As we move to the December 14th regularly scheduled meeting, this is where we will ask you to certify the levy. There's a few requirements of that meeting. It's also called the Truth in Taxation meeting. So the few requirements are it has to start, can't be held before November 24th, has to start after 6 p.m., must contain an opportunity for the public to comment, and as a district, we have to discuss the 21-22 payable levy and also our current fiscal 22 budget. We have till December 28th to certify that final levy to our auditor, and then also to submit that information to the Department of Revenue. So now I want to step kind of into a few just different exhibits that are going to be the information presented to you in the format that we would present it to you on the 28th. This is actually last year's information that's in here, so if you're wondering about the numbers, that's where it came from. So Exhibit A is essentially just a very quick snapshot of the three major funds that have a levy component. Obviously, it doesn't include all funds, but these are the ones that have a levy component to them. A little bit more detail as we go a little bit farther in here into Exhibit B. This is where you're going to see each of the individual line items in comparison to the previous year the percent increase, the dollar increase and the percent increase. I want to highlight the very small little stars and X's and so forth going down the side just off the shaded area. Essentially, those with an X are items that have been approved through a voter-approved levy. The ones with a star actually have an equalization component. So these are ones that we have to consider that if we actually lower our levy amount, it's going to affect our state aid amount as well because they're tied together. And then I believe finally, and it might not be on this page, let me jump to the next one. You'll have some towards the bottom, especially that have the exclamation point. Those are items that statutorily we can't under levy. We're required by law to levy the full amount. And in most cases, you're going to find it's debt service. So there's actually a component, a statute that says that we have to levy 105% of our current debt to guarantee that we have the money available to make our payments if something was ever wrong. And then, I'm trying to see if it's on here. You'll see a line, it's about the fifth one down in the debt service section called reduction for debt excess. Over time, that 5% builds a little bit, and so we credit it back to the voters to say, once we're allowed by MDE to say, okay, hey, you paid the bills that were associated with the 5% when we held it from a previous year, you can give that back now. So you see it come back pretty routinely as a credit. The last page, Exhibit C, is really just a lot of kind of information to give you a little more broad understanding of where some of the calculations are coming from. It talks about our net tax capacity, the adjusted pupil amounts, which when we're doing the levy here, we have to ultimately take an educated guess on how many kids do we think scholars are in our system as of today for next year. Obviously, there's going to be an adjustment to that. So as an example, we knew with the downturn last year and with COVID and the number of kids that that went elsewhere or went to homeschool, we actually lost about 992 kids from the levy perspective. So you'll see an adjustment of just short of 1.5 million on our operating levy as an example, just for that correction from 1 year. But that's the nature of the levy, of estimates that are then trued up with adjustments. So. The very last page here is really just a sample, so you have an understanding of what the tax statement looks like coming to each resident. It's broken into each taxing jurisdiction has their areas, so a little bit farther down, if you find the Spruceville School District, you'll see the voter-approved levies from the previous year and the increase proposed for this year. Same thing for the non-voter approved. This is generally what all Hennepin County tax statements look like, so you just have a good understanding. And then have a good understanding of exactly when questions may come to you, especially from the public, of where this information's coming from. So at that point, I guess I would like to turn it back to Chair Dawson-Walton for any questions about the process that we might be able to answer for you.
Okay, does anybody, I can open it up to anybody have any questions or comments, clarifications? You know, we do this every year, so thank you. Anybody have anything? No? Yeah, I think we support, that we understand the flexibility that's needed at this point, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much,
Appreciate it.
and we will talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Yes, one of many, we'll see you.
Thank you.
A lot. All right, turning it back over to you, Superintendent McIntyre.
Yes, when I noticed, if you need to take a little break on your own, please do that, because we're trying to stay on schedule. We are, thanks to Kelly and John, we are back on schedule, pretty much. So we're going to bring up Christine Wroblewski to start with our strategic roadmap. Board members, you've been working hard on this. This, I think, is our third work session, and we're close. Exciting to get ready to move this forward, and then from there we'll move into our excellence in governance work. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you. It's good to be back with you all, and we have your Assistant Superintendent, Michael Lehan, here as well, the three of us have been working to deliver back to you the strategic roadmap draft. I don't have it in a presentation form for you because we've seen it a few times. I believe you all have copies in front of you, and you've seen the strategic roadmap draft a few different times. What we have for you tonight is the roadmap with revisions based on our last conversation, August 17th. So we took that information, and the changes that we made were to clean up some of the language on the core values. There was some redundancy in some of the wording based on the changes we were making around the board table. And then with the strategic directions, you'll see highlighted on your portion, and the viewing audience can see it on the agenda packet at home, is that the strategic directions, C and E, we've changed the language to try and clean it up a little bit. So we have sent it to you all prior to today so that you had some time to think through it. I think one of you had some suggestions to change strategic directions C and E slightly or a little bit more, but the changes that were made, if you'd like me to read them, are under the core values for honor and integrity, cleaning up the vocabulary again, so it reads as holding ourselves, each other, and our system to the highest standards to create the best conditions for learning. The other change was under innovation and excellence, cultivating creativity, ideas, confidence, and transformational growth. And then strategic directions, again, with kind of streamlining the language a bit. For C, promote inclusive participation of our communities and provide timely, relevant, and easily accessible communication. And then the other change was E, to lead, develop, and align our district toward continuous improvement. So those are the changes. You also, we inventoried you all, so to speak, and asked if you had any suggested changes to the roadmap. I would say most of you thought the changes were sufficient. We did have a couple of suggestions. One is for item C. Instead of our communities, say all of our communities. That was one of your suggestions. And then strategic direction E. I think that one of you, if you would like to expound on the vagueness of strategic direction E. I think that the sentiment was perhaps the district should already be striving for continuous improvement, and could you change strategic direction E if you might have a suggestion in that regard. So I will offer it back to you to say, what are your thoughts, feedback, suggestions on this version of the roadmap? Because if you feel it's sufficient, we will go back to Michael Lehan and Kay Lella, and they will go back and get feedback so that you can take action on a strategic roadmap in November. And I'm kind of looking across to Superintendent McIntyre to say, that's our plan, is to bring it back with any suggested changes at a work session around November 9th, and then have it at your board table for the regular meeting on November 14th with any of those changes that are brought forward. I think that's correct.
Okay, so you're looking for feedback for this, the changes made.
For this
Okay.
version. Mhm.
I'm gonna go down the line and just see if anybody has anything. Director Douglas? Simon?
No, I think that I like this version without any further edits. I'm ready to move forward.
Okay. Sue Jones?
I'm good with this, and I'm good if we need to put all of our communities in there. Either way, I'm good.
Director Brooks?
So generally, I'm good with this. Just a couple comments. The innovation and excellence in pink, I think speaks more about innovation than it does excellence. So that's the one issue that I see there. On C, all of our communities would feel, I think, a little more intentional than just our communities. And then I am good with E as is, particularly after the caregiver surveys that we just received earlier.
And maybe I could add to, when we're thinking about E, the way we're strengthening that is, honestly, this process we're going through from strategic roadmap to a new operational plan, a new board calendar, department improvement plans, school improvement plans, that alignment, really strengthening that alignment from this roadmap all the way down to our building and our site, classroom, delivery. So that's when the whole strategic plan has come together. Christine, you can't see me smiling, but I'm like, we're getting close.
You-
That all those elements will start coming together. and really that alignment piece that this letter E is trying to speak to.
Right, and they'll support each other, and as you recall, we merged the process from the classroom to boardroom that we started with you in the ECAP process, and there was much more data internally on leadership from the ECAP process. So it's combining all of those elements, and you will see that there will be a lot of interplay between the vision cards, the operational plans, your board 3-year plan, 1- and 3-year plan, will all come together so that you will continually have new context, new updates. It's not just a yearly plan, just like what you were doing here today, looking back, but looking forward and saying, where are we going to be in 2 years so that we can anticipate for the budget priorities farther out. Okay, Director.
I'm good.
Director Grady?
Thank
Okay.
you for all of the work that everybody's been doing on this.
All right. So my question then is the full board amenable to adding under C, participation of all of our communities?
Yes. Yes.
Yes? Okay, we'll make that change. And I'm looking to Mr. Lehan to say he's good, so that we will move forward with getting feedback and bringing that back in a couple months' time.
Thank you.
Okay, you might as well stay up there. We'll just transition to our next and final topic, which is our work on board excellence and governance. And so we last time, I believe, got through or close to through our agenda setting and board resolutions, but we're not able to get to that board shared values section. So we probably have a bit of review on all three to do because we were tight on time last time, and probably just worth a little bit of a rewind just to make sure we're solid in those areas. And I know we have some feedback. So Christine, I'll turn it back to you to kind of walk through that inventory that you've been collecting.
All right, so I'll start with the ways of working together packet. As you recall, it's something that we've been working on through surveys with you, through discussions. And so there are 3 main areas in the working together toward excellence and governance packet. One is all about the agenda setting protocols that you have. Most of this is already based on your policies that you have in place, but it's really to clarify. This was the discussion that we've had. So as new board members come on, about twice a year, you'll be checking in with each other to make sure that you are all in sync and understanding of the protocols and practices. So the first one on agendas, and just like we did with the strategic roadmap, changes are offered in pink on your drafts. And in clarifying with Mr. Palmentier, we had some clarifications on agenda setting and changes so that we wanted to make sure that we were dotting all the i's and crossing all the t's. Changes to the agendas at the meetings can be done at the regular meetings, according to your policy and Robert's Rules of Orders, because of the way that you post your work session and your special meeting agendas. It is much more difficult to change agendas once you are already at your work session or your special board meeting, so that you'll see that change reflected to say, regular board meeting versus all of your board meetings. So that's that change that's reflected on your agenda packet. And that is the only change to the agenda setting protocols that we've all been discussing. Excuse me. The other section, which I believe you are all in agreement on, is around the resolutions and the consideration for bringing forward resolutions from different board members. So we have that practice set as part 2 of your agenda setting packet for the guidelines for resolution submissions. I did not receive any feedback from you all on that section either. And the area where we received the most feedback is really around what started with, thank you very much, Sherry. What started with, do you want a board code of conduct? So you all started with that review yourselves. I think it was through your policy committee. A couple of you had volunteered to look through that. You came back as a board and you had some ideas that were generated. In the end, we worked with a couple of you to bring forward to you what are some commitments that you can have as a board, again, that you can revisit a couple of times a year, so that you can say, is our commitment to working together? That's the first column. What is our individual commitment as board members? What are the expectations we have for us individually? And then the final column was really something you did not have in place, but many other school boards do. If we are challenged with each other, or if violations occur, what do we do about that as a board? And the first suggestion here is that some of these values you thought would be aligned eventually to your strategic direction and core values. Director Simons has offered a suggestion that perhaps we should align your board governing values to the core values that are in your strategic roadmap, so that's something for you to consider. You also have some suggestions from you individually, and if you look at your board member feedback for work sessions, you will see under the ways of working together feedback comments that there are some suggestions to add to the board shared values commitments, and also to some questions around if violations occur, and some comments as well. So what I wanted to point you toward are some of the notes at the bottom that answer some of the questions that you posed. Excuse me again. One is, there was a question about what is a censure or a reprimand, and essentially a censure is a formal reprimand. There were questions about why would you remove a board member? So we took it directly out of statute, just so you could see what it says in Minnesota State statute. And also, just kind of a highlight to let you know that the U.S. Supreme Court is taking up the issue of hearing arguments about whether a local government body can censure the speech of a member of its body. So that's going to be argued later this year at the Supreme Court, or if that violates members, whether it's a city council, a school board, any kind of local board, if that is considered a violation of your constitutional free speech. So that is all being taken up. Another question that was asked was, what might be reasons for removal of a board member? And I'm going to point this out. It is very uncommon to censure or remove board members. It is a last resort. And so it's something that board members generally just have in terms of policy. So if you need to go there, you have it stated in policy. So it's really uncommon. It's a last resort. But it is something that most school boards do have. And that is where the original draft came from. In your copy on the ways of working together was taken directly from other school districts and that language. It was revised by me in consultation with Tim to make sure that what are some of the things that we had heard from some of your conversations around the board table, and trying to adjust the questions you were asking about process and making sure that you have a process and protocols in place. So that's where some of the changes had come from since the last version that you saw. So what I'll do is give you a chance to look at some of the suggestions that are offered. And if the board members who had offered them would like to read them aloud, I think that might be a great way to go. And I'm going to leave it to Chair Dawson Walton to maybe get feedback around the room on the different aspects of the packet. And maybe you can comment on the agenda, the resolutions, and then the values and commitments sections.
Okay, so should we want to start with the agendas that you went over? So Christine, I'm going to need you to help me. I mean, you've really been working on this, so you want to go through just to see where everybody's at with the feedback and whoever provided this feedback on the agenda setting resolutions piece
Right.
first.
So the feedback that we received was primarily, regarding the agenda setting, was from Director Simons.
Okay.
And Director Simons, maybe you'd like to
Okay.
give us more of the detail.
Yeah, no, so I agree with this, it looks good, I just was mentioning that, this is assuming that there's not something new or unexpected, things have been moving very rapidly, our time between our work session and the special meeting, for example, so I think that's under the, assuming something new doesn't emerge, which I think we probably all agree that that's the intent. And then that Robert's rules does technically allow us to add something, and certainly that could be voted down at that time. So that's just a matter of open meetings and meeting protocol.
Right. And your policy does state how to add agenda items. My understanding is that you've started to get into a bit of a groove on proposing agenda items in advance. The intention here is to not catch the public unaware with any agenda items added at the last minute or each other unaware. So as much as possible, if you have, as board members, an agenda item you'd like to see on the regular meeting or propose around the work session table, that you send it on to the board chair and the superintendent as early as possible, and then go through the process that we've outlined here.
If I may, I actually had a comment that I don't think was included in this, which was, I may not have been specific in my comment, but my only concern is around when an issue arises that the board, the superintendent, the board chair, or the vice chair do not want to put on the agenda, and then other board members can't, it doesn't get voted on at a board meeting if you try to bring it forward. So then there's no opportunity for that specific topic to be discussed in a public forum. And if we have community members asking us to have a conversation, we don't have anything that kind of says, yes, we will at some point, like, not necessarily right now or at the next meeting, but to ensure that all voices are heard, I think it would be appropriate to have some sort of, I guess, fail-safe in place so that all topics will be heard at a point in time. I know that prior to 2016, I think, the 2016 election, the standard practice of this board, or the board of this school district, was that if an item was brought forward that, say, a board chair or the superintendent did not want to place on the agenda, but two board members at a meeting wanted to bring it forward, that it would be brought forward. Even if everyone else was gonna vote no or not support whatever the item was, that at least it would be brought forward for the public to know that it's being heard in some form. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, and I recall us having a conversation about that topic. My understanding is that any board member can bring forward an agenda item, and the board, so that board member can bring it into the public forum at the board table. The issue is whether the full board will support adding it to the agenda or not. That's only when you're already past the agenda's been set and already posted.
Right, and that's kind of my point, is that if one board member wants to bring it forward and nobody else is willing to support it being heard, then it will not be heard. There will be no discussion about it.
So I think that's a matter of reality of the positions of board chair, vice chair, and the superintendent. But I do think that in the process of, in the meeting, saying that I want to add this agenda item, there is discussion about adding the agenda item. So there would be public discussion that it was desired to be added, and then it was voted that it would not be added. So that's correct, that it may never be added to the agenda, and I think that's a fact of the importance of electing the positions, and that, yes, it's correct, not every topic will always be heard when a board member wants it on the agenda. I understand your point, but I think that's a fact and a reality of board's business.
And if I can offer, once you start getting to a point as a board, and some board members have time-certain agenda items on their regular board meetings, I know you're working toward that here for your work sessions as well, is when you have a finite amount of time to do your board work, if you are having board members being allowed to add agenda items, it really does take the time away from some other agenda items that you may have scheduled for. And I agree with Director Simons, which is you have the opportunity to at least get that statement out there about trying to get it on the agenda. And it's quite possible that it might be a different time that you bring it up on a work session or a board meeting agenda at a later time when maybe the board is more amenable or thinks it's more appropriate.
I do have a question. So at our last meeting, there was an agenda item added, and the explanation was that 2 board members had added it. But on this protocol, there is nothing about this 2 board member request. Is that correct?
There is nothing in this document about a 2 board member request.
Okay, so going forward, it's not about 2 board members requesting something be added, but that this process we are now going to follow.
That's my understanding. I'm going to look to the superintendent and your district council for that response.
I'm trying to remember, Tanya, what that topic was. Was it the run resolution?
No, it was the denouncement.
Okay, well, thank you, thank you. My feeling is, and I feel like that we've already tested this a bit. I know you talk about stress testing sometimes, and there's been 2 instances I can think of where there's been a request to add something to the agenda, and we really try to
Yes.
honor that while weighing what are the other topics. Do we have, do we need to move something like in a request I recently received, I'm going to move something off to make space for that. So I think the intent is to really do what we can to make that fit. After that, assessment, is it this meeting that we should do that? Is it coming up soon? When you look at the board calendar, and we're trying to make that board calendar for the year being mapped out as well. So my sense is, I think to your point, Director Simons, that's, the role of the chair clearly in our policy. That's one of the roles along with the superintendent, but that's also by listening to the requests of the board members, all the board members, if they have items that they're requesting. I don't know, Tim, you wanted to add anything to that? Because when I get into policy, I always make sure I'm
Yeah, the only thing,
validating that.
right, the only thing I might add is that if there were to be something of that nature, my best suggestion would be that we have something in our bylaws, that we'd actually change our bylaws, so policy 203 would be modified to actually specifically state that. I do believe, and Christine, maybe you're aware of this as well, I do believe that some school districts have established that. If you have 2 board members that would come forward and say that they wanted to have something added to the agenda, as long as it's time, by a certain time, then it could get on the agenda.
We had discussed that at one point.
Yeah. I'll make this point as well. I mean, Christine and I had some conversations about when this would happen. Regular school board meetings, there is the possibility of utilizing the motion practice and putting something on the agenda, and actually even having discussion about why it's a matter of significance. There would be discussion even about I wouldn't say necessarily the merits, all the underlying merits, but at least certain discussion about why something is important enough to be added to the agenda. So that actually does give an avenue in our regular board meetings. And the distinction I made with Christine was when we're talking about special meetings, work sessions, and I'd say anything that's not a regular school board meeting, that's when you need to be really careful. Because if you change the agenda, the public doesn't really know. A regular board meeting, we can all say, the board's going to do business. And you better show up, because the board could change its business and make certain decisions. But at special meetings, you better comply with notice requirements in advance, so you're not actually sneaking on agenda items. This board would never do that. It's never done that in my experience. But you're not putting something on at the last second to just vote on something that the public wasn't aware of.
I'll add one more thing, since Superintendent McIntyre mentioned it. One of the things that is helpful when you set an annual and 3-year board calendar is the likelihood that the issues that board members want to have addressed are placed somewhere on that calendar, especially if, several of you have the same concern. I'll give some of the responses to the survey that you had today. So there might be something that is generated from new data like that you say, boy, we don't see the need for it to be on our next few meetings, but we know it's something that we want to get to. So some of the questions around, what does the communications plan look like? Those are things that might make sense somewhere down the line once you have more information coming back from your new communications director, for example. So that's where being able to plot out your calendar for the long term is really helpful with some of the agenda setting questions as well. Okay.
I have a quick question for you, Christine. In pink, it emphasizes at a regular board meeting, and you talked about this when you first started. Can you just clarify why this is focused on regular board meetings versus work sessions as well?
Yes, and I think Tim was just commenting on that. It really has to do with the information that you're posting. If you are having a work session or a special board meeting, you're posting what the subject is in advance. At a regular board meeting, as Tim just mentioned, it's a board meeting where the public is expecting you to do business. You may change your agenda much more, well, easily, if you will. You have motions and actions in place to be able to adjust your agenda at the board meeting. So this one, you have to comply with your posting requirements much more strictly, because people may not have seen any changes to your work session or special board meeting agendas. That's why we've emphasized at a regular board meeting that this is very specific to changing the agendas at your regular board meetings.
So going back to Director Douglas's comments, I do think it's important that we have some way to get items on the work session agendas as well. We often tend to fill up our work session agendas with these pre-planned presentations that oftentimes don't go anywhere. And we miss a lot of the hot topics that are happening out in the community, the issues and concerns that we're hearing on a day-to-day basis. We often don't get time to talk about those in work sessions. And I think that's probably the most appropriate place to have some of those discussions versus a business meeting where we are actually scheduled to vote. So yeah, I would say for the most part, I'm fine with this document as is, but to Director Douglas's point, I do think we need a way to get items that weren't pre-planned a year in advance on the agenda so that as a board, we can be responsive to our stakeholders.
Well, I can speak to that. So I give the board members at least a 2-month heads up on the work session topics that are coming. And you've seen them change because of the immediacy of topics. And you all reach out to either Kelsey or myself for ideas, and we take that, and that's why those changes happen. So that's why the importance of, and I know Joan was scheduling a regular kind of getting back into our, now that summer's over, a regular scheduled one-on-one meeting. So I would offer that I expect all of you, and Kelsey won't speak for you, reach out when you have topics you think need to be on, and then we're gonna have to weigh out, because the topics that have been put on those agendas come from you also. These are the things you wanted us to come to you with in work sessions. So what we've run into is more topics than time, especially when we were doing the almost monthly, I think we did monthly staff development sessions for about 6 months. So I've been very careful about how many nights a month you've been coming together. So that's the balancing act we're struggling with. So I feel like there's a good mechanism there. And we've been trying to do our best to foreshadow out 2 months ahead, because there's certain things that are time sensitive that have to come to the work session before they can come to the regular meeting as well. So those are all the nuances, and allowing, of course, our staff time to prepare information for you so you're well informed about whatever the topics are. So I'm open to different ideas, but hopefully there's some of those mechanisms can continue to be utilized as we plan out the work session topics. Those are reviewed weekly as well with chair and vice chair.
Oh, sorry.
If I may just
Yeah.
offer a suggestion. We previously had a 15-minute time slot at the end of our work sessions to do exactly what you're suggesting, Thomas, so that board members could bring up a topic, not necessarily to go full into detail, but to say, hey, this is the topic, this is what I think we need to talk about, this is why. And honestly, a lot of times, those were things that were already coming, or maybe there wasn't a suggestion that day, but it just provided that opportunity and in a concise time frame, so that we didn't get sucked into a deep conversation unplanned.
So one suggestion I would have in that is we start using that one-year board calendar at the end of work session meetings, those last 15 minutes. So you can be looking out all the way through the rest of the year on what's been previously scheduled, and you might be able then at that point to bring up if you want changes to that, so we have adequate time to prepare. But that could be a regular routine. We could do it last 15 minutes and use that tool, because that maps out every month and every topic for work session and regular meetings as we know it at that point in time. And it changes, we're trying to get to that point of using that document So I think that's a tool to get to Director Douglas's suggestion that could work
Yeah.
for doing that.
I was gonna say that, because Heather has brought that up before, and I do think we need that, that time, so to be able to really talk about the prevalent topics and to look at kind of the future of, what do we need to kind of move around. So I would support that, absolutely.
Can I just interject and clarify? So with respect to and I'm actually aware of what you're talking about, Director Douglas, there was at least some space that was made at the end of work sessions, because I think maybe for this very reason, maybe for what Director Brooks was bringing up and what you've mentioned. There's a very fine line between kind of informational sharing and actually kind of deliberating and engaging in a process which starts to look like an open meeting law question. And so the only thing I might say is that we, to have just kind of a catch-all item, and just, I'm not generally comfortable with that. If we make a 3-day notice, if we can get on what the topic even is going to be discussed rather than miscellaneous.
Well, it could be a one-year review of the board calendar. That could be just a standing item, and each month the board reviews that board calendar. Because that's specific to the scheduling of things for work sessions and regular meetings. Would that help?
Yeah, I'm just trying to conceptualize what that looks like and how it would be noticed, that's all. I mean, it's possible, and you don't want to get overly pedantic about the open meeting law, but you also have to be terribly careful too.
So how did they do it before, then? What was the agenda item?
I think that there was some, I don't even know how that evolved. I know that at one meeting it was, there was just some kind of discussion about that. And I don't even remember whether what I recall,
It was on
there
the
was,
agenda, but I can't, it was like really short. It was like 2 words, like, or discussion, open discussion or something like that. It was
Yeah.
very generic. But I don't remember the exact language that we used.
yeah. Again, you're always, the notice requirements are the important piece, so that if you had some discussion that came up and the public didn't see in the notice that there was going to be something there, you always kind of run that question about transparency and compliance with the open meeting law. So I think there's ways around it. We can have conversation. I certainly don't want to stifle the notion that it doesn't make a lot of good sense, but I also feel like you're going to have some effort rather than we're just going to talk about miscellaneous items.
I'm actually not a big fan of the whole miscellaneous item idea, just because we've talked about this as a board. Like, I don't like being put on the spot and not being prepared. But if we were to submit whatever that topic was prior to that agenda going out and being published, I think that would give the board ample time to think about that topic, as well as administration opportunity to prepare. I like the idea of putting that small chunk of time at the end of the meetings, but personally, I would like to be prepared for that discussion if we are actually able to have a discussion on whatever that topic is.
Yeah.
So it looks like it was just listed as additional items of interest.
Yeah. And I'll just say, at least in terms of having 3 days' notice and knowing what the topics are going to be kind of discussion, and it sounded like, Director Brooks, you were at least even kind of suggesting this, is that if we know what maybe are some issues which are percolating and might be of interest and maybe even the board's going to have brief discussion on, if those could be placed on an agenda 3 days in advance, or 3 days in advance in compliance with the open meeting law.
Well, my recommendation would be the one-year calendar, so you can see every topic that's currently listed is reviewed. And so I can say to you, please look at this and let's talk about, is this what you still want next month? Or is there a topic that we need to move off because we need adequate time to move? And we might say, well, yeah, but that one's time sensitive. Let's move something else. It gives you more information as board members to see what's coming each month forward, and it opens the door to say, maybe there's a more relevant topic we need to get to.
I'm good with that, but in my mind, I think that's in addition to what we just talked about. Like, I don't want a discussion about the one-year calendar to take precedent over the actual topic itself.
But how could we have a,
We
I
would need
guess
more than
I'm-
3 days' notice to prepare for a conversation about it.
And that's what we were just talking about.
So I guess what I was suggesting was not necessarily having an in-depth conversation at that time, but saying, I would like to bring this item forward for discussion. So I think that
Right.
falls in line with what Corey's suggesting. It's not us getting into the minutia of that conversation at that time, but just particularly for, I'm thinking about when our public says, you know, I'd really like you to talk about this. And maybe it's not something that feels urgent to the district, but we could say, hey, this has come forward as an interest. Can we look at putting this on the calendar? And maybe it's in 5 months, I don't know, but just so that they're hearing that they're being heard, if that makes sense.
If I may, I guess I disagree a little bit here. I feel like what Heather's talking about is the intention of the listening sessions, and that's when we hear from the public what they really want us to say. I'm perfectly comfortable with the decision tree right now for setting the agenda for the regular school board meetings, as well as Superintendent McIntyre pointed out, that we have the opportunity to look at the board calendar and to see the meetings come up and then adjust or make suggestions as necessary. And that I sense our council's trepidation about the complexity of this, and I think for simplicity's sake, as well as our efficiency, that we should just sort of keep things where they're at. I'm comfortable with this.
If I can, Director Dawson-Walton. So maybe there's a middle ground between that. And what I heard you talking about, Director Douglas, was even if it was at the end of the meeting, I have an interest in discussing this at a future meeting. That sounds to me different than drawing someone's presence to see that the board is actually actively engaged in a meeting and a decision on a topic, right? So it's kind of a placeholder for that in the future. That sounds different to me than necessarily, I want to talk about this at this meeting now because I've had a number of constituents bring this up. Let's have a discussion. That sounds like a meeting at that point. So, there are probably ways around it. We can tweak it a little bit, I think. But maybe with it kind of surfacing what some of your interests are, and I hear you also saying the same thing, Director Brooks, there might be some way to kind of get there to have a placeholder for topics for future discussion.
like if we had emails that were like talking about like the 2022 legislative session, like, we think this should be on it, and then at the end of a work session, we could look at, the calendar and say, actually, or, this is when we're talking about this, because we've heard, this is something there's interest, and then this is the date we're talking about that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that seems to me different, right? I mean, it's a way that at that work session, then the public would hear, yeah, by the way, this is an interest that I've heard from the community. We're going to have this opportunity to talk about it later. That sounds different to me than actually having the substantive conversation, so.
And so if I can offer, it sounds like you're talking about getting into a new routine with your work sessions a little bit. One is looking ahead at your calendar to say, what do we want on the agendas? And changing that routine so that that's something regular. And I've talked to your superintendent a number of times. He would love to see that so that you are all coordinating and in agreement on that. So for you all, it's also that opportunity to say, what are some of the discussions that we as board members would like to see on future agendas? If I could offer that we add, because we did change a lot of the language here to regular board meetings, maybe add an item F that says as much as possible, if board members are seeking items on work sessions, they submit their suggestions to the board chair and superintendent, and that will be communicated back. So we can certainly add that in there. And I will just point out, it's not that it happens frequently, but if there is a topic of such importance to you as a board, I'm thinking of safety issues from years back. If there's a safety issue in the community, sometimes school boards will call a special meeting so that you can have a discussion just around that issue. So I just want to put that out there for you, Director Brooks, as well. So if something is that timely, and again, you can offer suggestions, I think, through the regular channels. From my perspective, outside looking in, I also want to make sure that you're able to get to the agenda items and have the conversations that are on your table as well, because they take up so much of your time. Okay, I think then, so we'll make a change to add as much as possible, adding information about submitting work session ideas in advance, maybe not the same decision tree, and then adding to your work session agendas, reviewing the calendar and items, upcoming items that may be placed on the upcoming board calendar. Does that satisfy?
I do have one additional comment suggestion. So could we implement this and set a date for when we will do a check-in to say, is this working or not working, since it's a new way of working? Like maybe 3 months, a 15-minute work session item that says, is this working? Does everybody still agree, or do we need to make modifications?
Yeah, I think of, the first thought is at least twice a year, usually we do that kind of the ways of working check-in, usually around after the organizational meeting in January and then again in the summer. But we could plug in 2 more, and if that's on we can start with that on the agenda.
Because so right now it says that we're reviewing on a biannual basis, January and July or August.
I think what Director Simons is suggesting is for this specific item, do a quick check-in with all of you to say, how's it working?
Actually, I meant like the whole page 3, like because we're saying this is the way we want to work and we've never put it on a page before. And we're saying we are establishing this as a new practice. I'm asking that we check back in sooner than kind of the regular twice a year to ask if it's working or not, or if there's any suggestion for changes. I'm asking if we can do that.
That kind of
Others can say no.
as an agenda item.
Yeah, like a 15-minute like check-in, just like how we did with the strategic plan, where it was like, check, no changes.
Right, so what I'm hearing is, in 3 months, check on it. 3 months again, that'll be our biannual thing,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
6 months.
Yeah.
And then keep going, just an initial.
Well, just by logistically, like, I would say either sooner than 3, because 3 is December, it's a short month.
Yeah.
4 is January, we're gonna do it anyway in January. But
That's-
maybe then
okay,
it's
then that's fine.
March. Like, we could do a spring, maybe it's, then we get into the winter, spring, summer, fall, winter. Am I on the same page with you, Tanya?
I think we're speaking the same language.
Okay.
Whatever it works.
All right.
Okay, so we will change some of the language here and get that back to you with what we've just discussed on the agenda items. Was there any discussion, feedback on resolutions?
Anybody have any feedback on resolution? Let's open it up. Okay.
Nothing, okay. And then we get into the final section, which, again, is the one that has generated, I think, the most interest from all of you since the beginning of the calendar year. And so we have some suggestions that have been brought forward and a number of questions. So as I pointed out earlier, there were some answers to some of your questions below, and you had some suggestions, some suggested additions, I think, to the center column from a couple of you, and also some additional questions. I did want to point out and remind you, as Tim was mentioning just a few minutes ago, on that third column, if we're challenged or violations occur, it came up from some of you that it would be great to start with something like restorative practices. So if you harm each other in some way, this is really about your board interaction with each other, but do you use some of those restorative practices to repair, rebuild, and some of that trust and move forward? I have checked with Kate Emmons in your district, and I think they would be willing to do a development session with you on restorative practices if you're interested in that. So that is something that would be somewhere down the future, just to see what you already are doing and how you might bring that forward to the board table. But the items in bold below, in the event of a board member's willful or continuous violation of policy, the board would address and resolve the matter the following process. Again, this primarily came from other districts to begin with, because they generally have this as part of their policy. In speaking with Tim, we would recommend that this section, if you choose to move forward, would need to become part of your board policy 203. So that would need to move forward through your policy committee and the normal process of changing policy if you as a board choose to move forward with some language like this. Again, the exact language might be different once it moves through your policy committee if you choose to go in that direction. But this is the suggestion that we have based on my review, speaking with Tim, bringing it forward from the conversations that you all have had around the table. And again, looking at what other districts have in place already. So the suggestions that are in your feedback document. I don't know if you'd like me to read them, or if we'd like the board members that brought them forward. You'd like me to do, okay. So under the
Anybody can-
board.
I'm sorry, if somebody does want to, they brought it forward, please do. I mean,
I will move forward? Okay. I'm looking at we have to do a lot more of this with the masks, don't we? Yeah. Okay, so it was suggested that you add to I think the center column, our commitments as school board members, so that section about how you would like yourselves to comport yourselves, what are the expectations of board members individually. The suggestions are treat board colleagues and community members with respect and dignity, avoid publicly expressing individual negative judgments or opinions about each other or community members. This includes our school board-related social media. The third suggestion is retaliating against community members for speaking during the public comment period, which would include reaching out to their place of employment. And the fourth suggestion is honor my responsibility to share information that is based on evidence and not share misinformation to the public in meetings or social media, which also leads to suggestions in the last row there. Maybe add something about respecting fellow board members, along with respecting staff, administration, and others. So I think the first four bullets are specific suggestions that are consistent with the last suggestion that was noted. And then we also had a suggestion of aligning our commitment of working together, that values-based section, the first column, with your just agreed-upon strategic roadmap values, that somehow merging those two together. So those are the suggestions. You do have some questions, I think, have been answered in the document earlier. In terms of a reprimand and censure, I'm going to look to Tim, but they are the same. The censure is a formal reprimand, correct?
Yeah. I mean,
But
there's
wait,
nothing
are we
statute about
focused-
it at all, but that's just,
are you just asking right now about this middle column, or are you?
I'm sorry, I was just getting through some of the suggestions and questions.
Okay.
So yes, we will stick to the middle column for now. So the commitment as board members, if you wanted to provide your feedback on the suggested additions.
So, does anybody want to speak to anything?
I will.
Okay.
I added these suggestions based upon the same language that we use in, oh my gosh, find the right paper, and how the language that was based around treating the superintendent, administrators, and staff with respect and dignity. And it felt like that those are really great, but didn't extend into all the places that we needed, including each other and community members and public speakers at our meetings.
Okay.
I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm observing the other additions. I think we have to be careful. I mean, these are already quite subjective. And if we're going to begin bringing forward reprimands or other things for who's going to determine if I'm speaking honestly in discussions or not? Who's going to determine if what I'm sharing is considered evidence or misinformation? Who's going to determine if something that I say is considered negative or a judgment or an opinion? I think we're getting really into some very subjective ground. So I'm not really very supportive of some of these additions that were brought up after. I think we've got already a very full list of commitments that, again, can certainly be interpreted in many different ways by any individual board member that we have to be really thoughtful about. And I think these are things that we could all say we certainly strive to, but when things get tense, when emotional issues and challenging issues get brought forward, I could see the subjectivity of these becoming quite problematic when it starts getting into the third column. So again, like I think the third column becoming needing to be put into policy is really important. But I do think it's good to have something on the page that says what we're striving for, but how we go about applying column 3 to column 2 is going to be really important.
Well, and I think that, we all started with the intention of addressing our behavior around shared values, but even something like integrity can be viewed subjectively. And so what I really tried to do here is be more specific about the behavior that would be valued as using professional skills. And that way we have a little bit more of a clear guidance of how we need to act as board members in a professional way.
Director Simons, could I ask a clarifying question?
Mm-hmm.
Were there any of those suggested items that you thought should be added in, or are you suggesting not adding those items in?
I think what is already in the blue columns are sufficient, although I do think it made sense to me to add. Let's see, in the blue column, where we talk about treating the superintendent and staff with respect and each other, I think was probably something that we intended and maybe was an oversight, so I think that makes sense to add.
Okay.
Good.
I am supportive of the first edition, treat board colleagues and community members with respect and dignity, and also supportive of the second one, one that essentially says avoid publicly expressing individual negative judgments or opinions about each other or community members. I made a comment that this actually is in line with one of the last commitments, which is to treat the superintendent, administrators, and staff with respect and dignity. I'm not sure why fellow board members should be excluded from that. So I think that's why I'm supportive of that second one. The last two, in my opinion, get a little specific and I think are subjective. And while I'm supportive of them, I'm not able to visualize what those look like in policy form, where we can actually hold each other accountable for those. You know, how much research do I have to put in to determine if someone's sharing misinformation? And then, yeah, I'm not sure those last two should go on there, at least in their current form. And then lastly, I think one of the things that I did take away from those last two, and I did a quick search again through the commitments, you know, there is one in here that says, listen to the opinions and views of others from a variety of identities reflected in our district. But I also think it's important to maybe go a step further in making sure that we are, I guess along the same lines, respecting community members, particularly those that come in and speak before the board or participate in meetings. Yeah, so I think that's all I have.
Director Brooks, are you suggesting changing that bullet, the listen to the opinions and views of others, some of the wording there?
That would probably be the easiest for all, is to change that and maybe be a little more specific and go a little further than just listen to the opinions and views of others.
What are you suggesting?
I would probably just change it to similar to the last one, which says treat the superintendent, administrators, and staff with respect and dignity. I'd probably just go along the same lines and just tailor that one toward community members.
And then also add the listen to the opinions and views?
Sure. I mean, I think that's part of respecting community members, but if we want to be specific in saying that we will listen to the opinions and views of others, we certainly can do that.
Okay, so I'm sorry. It would change, so you're talking about the fourth bullet down.
Yes.
It's hard to, I really like that Google form that you had before we could kind of get, so can you just repeat it? I'm sorry, Thomas, one more time, what you just.
Yeah, I just wanted something that was a little stronger in respecting community members. And this felt a little weak, listen to the opinions and views of others. And so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of strengthen that one, tailored toward community members. I
could-
don't have specific verbiage right now, but that's what was in my mind.
If I can offer, I think you probably could start with, treat community members with respect and dignity, could be a separate bullet that you could add or combine it with, and listen to the opinions and views of others from a variety of identities. Now, again, you get into the subjective nature of, we have different notions of what respect and dignity are sometimes, and it's individualized, but we could certainly add that in as part of that bullet.
So here's my question. We talked also about adding each other under the treat the superintendent, administrators, and staff with respect and dignity. Do we just list all the people we want under there? Or are we gonna have separate bullets for each? Because if we're gonna, treat our community, what is the words we're using? The views of others from variety of identities from our district.
If you look at the main bullet, treat the superintendent, administrators, and staff with dignity, there is some issues that are specific to the role of an
Yep.
administrator. And so is that what you're speaking to, Director Mosqueda-Jones, is having something that's not specific to the role of an administrator, for example?
No, I'm just curious, are we gonna add an additional bullet for each other and then another additional bullet for community members?
I
Is
could
that-
certainly do that. I'm looking at
Is
the
that what
will
we're-
of the board
I
to
was
do
thinking of
that.
including board members in that last bullet point, along with treat the superintendent, administrators, and staff with respect and dignity, and then having community members separate from that bullet point.
The last sub-bullet,
You know,
Director Brooks?
Add
Okay.
board members to that one.
Okay, so avoid publicly expressing individual negative about the superintendent, staff, or each other.
I really think that there should be a section about our responsibility to treat the superintendent and staff one way, and then our interaction as a board and our interactions with community are a little bit different and a little bit more specific.
Okay. So I am hearing from you, some of you, that you would like to have at least a bullet in that middle section about treating each other with respect and dignity and treating community members with respect and dignity. So you'd like that to probably come back in some form, but also not make it too long, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the ones for the superintendent staff are really more specific, and there's a lot of great ideas in there that can flow into it, but I think it's really important to be specific about how we treat each other as a board, as well as community.
Okay. So I have some sense of that now. I don't think we need to change it at the table. We can do like we did with the strategic roadmap. I'm wondering if there are any other comments to the suggested additions brought forward regarding the commitments. So there were 4 suggestions from Director Grady, and we've heard from a couple of you, I think, on them. And I'm wondering if the rest of you want to provide any feedback on those specific suggestions.
Well, I have a concern about some of the additions, which is really around censorship. This really specifically talks about not speaking negatively or expressing opinions, and that's really part of our job. We have to let the public know how we feel about certain things, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be always negative, right? But sometimes it might be. It's okay to say, I'm disappointed that this occurred, or I'm frustrated with the outcome of this, or whatever it may be. It is okay to say that, and it's also important to our constituents to not feel like we're just rubber stamping everything and just like agreeing with everything all the time. They want to know when we agree or disagree with something, or just basically what our position is on something. And this feels very restrictive in nature, and also I just think that some of these things are really, really specific. And also a little bit shocking considering some of the behavior of the specific board member that came up with these.
Well, and I think you bring up a really good point about that, because I think what I'm trying to tease out in this is it's one thing, as you said, to express your opinion, and it's another thing to publicly attack another school board member or a
Oh, I
community member.
agree.
So what I'm hearing is you would like that reflected in here. I will try to thread the needle for you and bring back another version so that you can consider that, if that's the will of the board. And I know, so I understand your statements, Director Douglas, which is there, what's the line between saying negative judgments and opinions versus reflecting something that didn't go well and that you would like to see changed?
So I think while Director Brooks was talking, I observed a lot of agreement and head nodding, that I think we all agree that treating board members and community members with respect and dignity is what we all have consensus around. So integrating that in is probably the main point that I observed.
Okay. And I'm looking to see if I'm seeing acknowledgement. I'm not hearing disagreement about those. Okay. So I will move forward and bring you back an adjustment there. The suggestion around adding in the strategic roadmap core values to this document. So you have a number of values that exist on this document already. They're not in the center column. They're actually in that far left column. And Director Dawson-Walton, did you have some suggestions in that regard?
About say that again. Sorry, I was trying to look something up when you were talking.
So that-
I actually have a thought on
Okay.
that, if that's okay. I think it's a really good point to make sure that they're aligned with our strategic roadmap. And as I look at the values that we are ascribing to model on this first column, I compared them to our strategic roadmap values. They're very, very similar. And so I think that in essence and in spirit, that we've captured essentially the same values. They may not have exactly the same wording. Mission-driven isn't exactly under our district core values, but I think it's important to have as a board value. So that's kind of where I'm at on that particular thing, if other people have thoughts on that.
I mean, I guess I would just say, I mean, I definitely think we need to, I think we do. We created our values as a district. I do think there's some intentionality about, how we work together and what our values are together. And they should, I mean, I do think they should be aligned. I'm not sure they should be, obviously the same necessarily exactly, because I do think there's some differences. I am absolutely open to discussion around it. I don't know what you're seeing other districts, if they typically have different values or if they're pretty aligned with the district core values.
Some districts will have board values in addition. So the district values are the values that everyone is supposed to follow in a district, right? So and I recall the conversation you had around the table at the work session, which is everyone in every building and every program is going to be expected to follow these values, and it's going to look and sound a little different depending on the level and where you are in the organization. So I think it makes perfect sense to follow these values, and some boards, in addition to that, have board values or frameworks that they adhere to as a board and some commitments that they have. So we could certainly incorporate them. We could either do it at the top, or as Director Mosqueda-Jones was saying, they're very close. We can just look for the close connection on these, and where there isn't a direct matchup, leave the values as they are in the draft document.
Yeah, and my intent in bringing that forward was really in the spirit of, we just created a set of values. Why wouldn't we hold ourselves accountable to it?
Absolutely.
So that adopting that language and saying, yes, like we're asking all of the district to adopt it, and we ourselves are adopting it too. So that was the spirit of it. And given that when I looked through this, it was already quite similar, that was kind of where the suggestion came from.
I I would just add that I actually am supportive of updating the values to the core values that we just recently sort of finalized. One, for consistency, and two, we've already said they are pretty similar. But three, to Director Simon's point, these are values that we're expecting the district as a whole to uphold. I think we should set that example and do the same.
All right, we can incorporate that too. So when we come back with the additions for the center column, we can make the adjustments on the values column if that's the will of the board, and I'm sensing that that is.
I just want to clarify, because what I just heard is take these out and put in the strategic roadmap values. And I don't want to take all these out and just put the strategic roadmap values in there.
My approach to editing would be to add the core values in here and align, leave in anything that is not already covered by the core values. So I will take
Absolutely.
a crack at this and bring it
Thank
back
you.
to you like we did with the roadmap.
I just wanted clarity on that, thank you.
And I would agree with Director Mosquito Jones. I mean, I would not, the language under mission driven, I mean, understanding our purpose is to work as a team. I mean, it really speaks to our board. We're all here to serve our communities, and I don't wanna, I will say, I don't wanna lose sight of that. We obviously, and if that means incorporating this and saying, explicitly saying that our, strategic roadmap, the core values, but I just, there's some in here that I just feel pretty strongly about, and I would not wanna lose, in order to really advance our vision,
Yep.
with our district. So I look forward to you, you're good at this though, right?
I try.
I guess, Kelsey, your comment brings a question is, would it be redundant to add in extra, I feel like, I do like that idea, but that whole phrase right there, I feel like encompasses all of that other work already.
Exactly.
So I don't know if it's really, I don't know. I feel conflicted on it, but just something to consider.
Let's see what you
What
have.
in particular?
The statement, mission driven, understanding that our purpose is to work as a team and to advance the mission of the district. And then the purpose of our work and all that stuff. I feel like that encompasses the core values that we've already established. So I'm just wondering, this is already like kind of wordy, there's a lot of stuff already in here, I don't know if it would be redundant to specifically add in more pieces that we've already committed to, but I also think that they're super important, so I guess my thought around it is to streamline all of it, kind of like what we've been doing throughout this process, is to make sure that all the important pieces are included, but it doesn't get to be such a wordy, lengthy document, if that makes sense.
I hear, and I will certainly try to merge,
You got this,
align,
Christine.
streamline, and leave in the most important parts.
Perfect.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, and I'm aware of the time. We have
Oh my gosh.
4 minutes left. We've had great discussion about the first 2 columns of the board commitments. We've had some discussion about that, the last column there, and my suggestion is if the board is interested in pursuing what's in bold there and clarifying that you bring that to the policy committee for consideration, language, and updates, if it's something you're interested in putting in and adding to policy 203. Again, we could, spend time wordsmithing now. You're going to have to do it if you decide that you want to bring it forward for consideration as changing your policy. So if that's something you're interested in as a board, that's something for you all to consider and I think direct the administration toward if you think you would like it added as a policy and to go through those motions.
I think it would be appropriate for the board to have this discussion as a full board as it impacts all board members before moving it to policy.
And I'd like to have an answer to these questions in the third column, sooner than later.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
I'd like to have an answer to these questions in the third column. What does a reprimand mean? How's that different than a censure, et cetera?
On the back of that sheet.
On the back.
We provided, I think, some answers to some of those questions, Director Brooks.
Okay, so we are using the language of a reprimand, but it's the same thing as a censure, is what I'm reading.
And I'm gonna look to Tim Palmetier for that one as well. Is there a difference between a censure and a reprimand?
I don't think so. I think a reprimand and censure kind of occupy the same space.
Okay, and then I'm still unclear as to what a reprimand actually is beyond a denouncement.
At least my read would be that to me, censure and reprimand are essentially of some, I don't know if it was my microphone.
That was mine.
Thanks for good timing. Would be more disciplinary in nature. A denouncement is, I think, a separation or a disagreement with, and you can look it up at least in terms of how we might define those words, but my read on it would be that it's not specifically anything that's disciplinary. Denouncement is just, I don't agree with that. A statement of the board, which the board can always make a statement.
Okay, thank you. And then the last one, especially before this, is to go to policy committee. I'm curious what happens after C, which is board motion and formal reprimand of individual board member.
Well, under two, one of those three things could happen. It's not a order.
Correct,
So
but
what else
are we
could happen
saying-
after two?
Yeah, are we saying that a formal reprimand is
The
end
most
of
that could happen.
the end of the journey?
So in terms of what other school boards do have done, it can run the spectrum here, which is what we've included, which, given your conversations, again, your policy committee may have different specific language here, but the idea was that you have the flexibility and options depending on what is happening in the situation, which is why I wanted to give you some examples of what other school boards have done. It's everything from, violating, to committing a crime, which is what you would move forward with, to conflict of interest, to sharing confidential information publicly. So there's a number of different reasons, rationales, and it's a range. And so trying to get too specific, I think, would be, trying to predict the future and getting into specifics that it's going to be hard to predict. This is about boards, plural. As you think forward for the next 10, 20 years, could this be a policy that's going to be in play for maybe not any of you as board members, but future boards, if you think of it in that way?
Okay, so I'll be a little more specific. After item C, is the board in support of adding somewhere in the policy something about removal? I see it's listed at the bottom under the notes on one of the documents, but it's not listed in the list under number 2. And so if this is going before policy committee, and this is something we're going to spend our time on, I want to know if the board is supportive of adding that.
No, I'm not supportive of that, especially given that certain board members on this board right now have already specifically publicly identified that they would seek to remove board members, and we're all elected by our community members. And so unless something really egregious like a crime occurred, I think it would be not in the best interest of our community to remove them. Like I said, unless something really, really serious occurred. But when we have board members that are currently sitting that say that they're working towards removing other board members, and then they go on and say, let's add this, that's very, very concerning.
So, I think as far as column 3, in that I think I don't obviously like making up process and policy as we go. So I think that, I think I would err on the side of having processes that might be difficult, at least determined and documented, so that in a time of crisis, it's not being made up on the fly. So I do think, however, because this column 3 could and would affect every single individual, I do think that there should be an initial conversation in a work session before going into policy, so that we've got some representation from every board member, since it will affect them. And then policy committee could refine that into the actual policy to come back, because policy's only 3 people, and then when it comes back, there's really limited discussion, it just moves full steam ahead. So I think, I agree that there should be some early conversation. I'm not comfortable with the notion of removing board members as duly elected officials. That's the job of the public. However, I think in the circumstance of a crime, I think most people would say that that would be a duly noted legislative action. But if we don't put it on here and say in the event of a crime, then again, it'd be making it up in the moment of crisis. So I think that is a very severe action. But again, if it's not documented, then it would be made up in the time of crisis. So I'm conflicted on that. I am still processing it.
I guess I just would add that, I mean, this has been a really, really difficult 18 months-ish, and we keep kind of facing the same concerns as a board of like, what's the process? How do we move, how do we move forward? How do we navigate? How do we build relationship? I mean, this is no secret that, we're not always aligned, and that is okay, but I think it's how we work toward, the solutions that best serve our communities, knowing there's gonna be significant disagreements. And, any of us could be, are gonna be the next board chair, the next vice chair, the next treasurer, the clerk. I mean, roles change so much. And I do think we need something, that builds on kind of the trust in the relationship. So it is about the agenda setting. That builds on then how we move forward with resolutions. What are our shared values? What are our commitments? And then the ultimate thing that I think is very rare in rare circumstances is, what is a policy and procedure for really addressing, if anything, if a violation would occur or anything. And by the nature of it, some of it is more subjective than others. So, I would support, that was the purpose. We don't have enough time, and we're over time now to actually dive into this more, because we've talked about it during, a little bit during professional development. And I, thank you and Tim for kind of putting some kind of bones around it. So I would support, if the will of the board is that we would have another work session, dedicate some more time so we can all kind of have some shared understanding. I'd really be interested also, Tim, on some, I think there's a lot of conversation around like the social media piece. Somebody had suggested it here, and, I think that's super subjective too, right? Like, how, what is all that, how, I think that's such a newer outlet for so many, for all electeds, really. And so how that kind of comes into play. So I would be open to, to taking the time, to really talk about it at a work session. I do think at some point, I do support this recommendation, that it does go to policy, but I think that it's fair to have that really discussion, because I think, and to continue to build that trust.
I think it would be helpful to see what the policies are for other boards in terms of their 203 or what consequences are, and then that way we can kind of align ourselves with that a little bit more.
Any other, so what I'm hearing is you'd like that specific item of whether you're going to change 203 be brought back for a work session, and you would like me to take a crack at adjusting the other parts of this document. Is that correct? Okay.
If I may, I think really my understanding is that having a work session kind of around the whole, if we're challenged or when violations occur, that whole column, not just the bolded part, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, the whole thing, yes. Yep. And I just would encourage all of us to really think about this in preparation for our next board session, because it is, I mean, we're all elected here, we represent a super diverse community, and at the heart of it, which I think the hope is, kind of going back to just our strategic priorities, we are very aligned there, you know, and so, it's not like a fun discussion to have, but I think we're all held accountable, and it is not, does not single out one person. I mean, this is all of us. This is all of us are held to this standard and accountability. So I think that is, I know we don't have, our work sessions are already jam-packed, Corey, but I do, Corey's shaking his head.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Yeah.
Because you got some items in column 1 we got to come back with anyway, too, so.
Thank you, Christine. I think it's been really effective in the last few sessions about getting through this, and so I think it's a really good practice how we've been getting the documents and be able to provide input and then reviewing the input here. I think it's been efficient and effective and taken some significant leaps and steps forward. Appreciate it.
Very much so.
I think
Thank
it's
you.
just really important that we make sure we lay out that path for us in the event that something does happen, because things are volatile right now. And that's not personal, it's about creating policy.
All right, thank you.
So I'll be adding to, we're ready to, Christine and I are meeting early next week on a revision to that calendar. So between, I don't want to wait till our next work session, so
Yes.
I'll look at this topic and
Okay.
see if we can move some things around.
Okay.
You've all had some things you wanted real soon, and there's just not,
Yeah.
other than adding more nights, and you already have a lot of nights with committee meetings and other things, so that's really challenging sometimes. But I think we'll just keep prioritizing, and I need you to give me feedback on if I'm getting close to getting the right things on those work sessions, because this one feels really important to me to get
Very.
back quickly. So that might mean something's got to be pushed out another month. And giving you the long view of that as well, to see when those things are coming, to your point, Heather. So you still see they're still there.
Yep.
We've just rearranged the batting order for those.
I have one more thing I would like to add. You asked in column 3 about the restorative practices in a board development session. I would just like to say that I think considering some discussion on discipline in our district, and that is one of the tools that we use, that it might be helpful for us to have board development on those practices. So I don't want to lose sight of that.
Add that to your list, Corey. Okay, good.
Hopped on.
We'll be looking at that at the calendar, too.
We can do that in the summer. I'm just kidding.
I'm not getting the laser eyes at me right now. But
All right.
here's, I will offer this to you all. You're creating new routines, and so that takes a little bit of time. I'm confident that over the next few months, as these things get settled in, that it's not going to take 3 sessions to get to something that you could do in one. That's my optimistic viewpoint, once you get into that new routine.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Work session is adjourned at 9:11 PM. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.